Всім добрий вечір.
On behalf of the brave,
on behalf of every father and every mother,
wings for freedom. On behalf of our
warriors, and paves the way for a new history.
Hello and welcome to Tochnyi Weekly, the show that gets behind the headlines to discuss the full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine. So we have a packed show for you today. I will get right to it. So first we have the news that will be presented by myself. That'll be followed by the report from German aid to Ukraine. Then we have an interview with our contributor Alex S., who's here. It's a pre-recorded interview that he did with Andryushchenko about Mariupol. Next, we'll have an interview with Jonathan Pearce from Geopolitics, and we'll close out with Bionade, our contributor live from Ukraine. So, without any further delay, I will jump right into the news. Ukraine has reported thwarting a Russian scheme aimed at assassinating Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and other high-ranking officials. The plan allegedly involved a network of agents recruited by Vladimir Putin's domestic spy agency, the FSB. According to the SBU State Security Service in Kyiv, the reported agents were tasked with locating someone within the Presidential Guard's proximity. This individual would seize Zelensky and as he exited the building and carry out the assassination. The intended assassination was created as a gift for Putin, who was inaugurated for a fifth term at the Kremlin. Additionally, the FSB allegedly devised a plan to eliminate Ukraine's military intelligence chief, Kyrylo Budanov, and the head of the SBU, Vasyl Malyuk. The SBU implicated 3 FSB intelligence officers in the operation. One of the alleged Ukrainian agents was identified as a colonel within Ukraine's State Guard service. The colonel purportedly held clandestine meetings with an FSB officer in a neighboring European country before 2022. The timeline of the discovery of the plot against Zelensky remains unclear, but the SBU indicated that the preparations were well advanced. Allegedly, one of the Ukrainian agents received instructions from his handler in February 2022 to identify someone from Zelensky's inner circle. The FSB also directed its operatives to gather intelligence on prominent Ukrainian politicians. The agency claimed to have intercepted a phone call between an FSB officer and a Ukrainian contact outlining the complex plot to assassinate Budanov. The operation was reportedly scheduled to occur just before Orthodox Easter and involved the surveillance of Budanov's residence and a plan to launch a missile strike there, which would be followed by a drone attack. The SBU reported seizing drones, warheads, and mines from one of the arrested accomplices. The individuals, along with other alleged members of the network, are facing charges of treason and terrorism. The FSB allegedly pledged a $50,000 reward for operatives. Vasyl Malyuk, the SBU chief, was quoted as stating that the thwarted attack was intended as a gift to Putin and was a failure, and he cautioned against underestimating the strength and experience of the enemy. Moscow refrained from immediate comment on the matter. Previously, when asked about the arrest in Poland of an individual accused of collaborating with Russian intelligence for another potential attempt on Zelensky's life, the Kremlin also chose not to respond. Zelensky has claimed there's been at least 5 attempts to assassinate him so far. Intelligence sources in Kyiv speculate that it's unclear whether senior officials in Moscow had sanctioned the plot. They suggested it's possible that it might have been the initiative of mid-level officers seeking to impress their superiors, and that possibly they were acting completely independently. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky received a briefing from Alexander Syrsky, the commander-in-chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, on Saturday, May 11th. Zelensky stated that Ukraine was strengthening its positions in Kharkiv Oblast, where defensive operations are currently ongoing. Zelensky emphasized the focus on areas with the highest risk of Russian assault operations. He mentioned the ongoing defense operations in Kharkiv near the border, and that Ukrainian forces have been engaging in counteroffensive measures in these areas for the past 2 days to defend Ukrainian territory. Zelensky reported that he received 2 briefings from Syrsky, one in the morning and one recently, and he noted the reinforcement of positions, particularly in Kharkiv, with additional forces being deployed there. Zelensky also highlighted the effectiveness of artillery. Additionally, Zelensky described the situation in Donetsk as very intense, especially on the Petrovsk front near Semenivka and Natalyove, where over 30 clashes between Russian and Ukrainian forces occurred daily. He described the situation there as extremely challenging. On May 10th, there are indications that Russian activities have increased and an offensive has begun in Kharkiv Oblast and possibly elsewhere. Zelensky, during a briefing with Slovakian president, confirmed Russian troops' launch of the new offensive. Ukraine's defense ministry reported sending reserve units to Kharkiv, and they claim that the operational zone of Russia currently is not expanding, like Russia's not currently advancing their territory in Kharkiv, and that about 1,000 civilians so far have been evacuated from Kharkiv Oblast between the 10th and 11th of May. On the evening of May 10th, the U.S. Department of Defense disclosed a breakdown of the weaponry incorporated in the recently unveiled $400 million USD military assistance package destined for Ukraine. According to European Pravda, the latest allocation encompasses additional ammunition for Patriot and NASAM systems and Stinger anti-aircraft missiles, expanded HIMARS and 155 and 105 millimeter artillery shells, as well as equipment for integrating Western launchers, missiles, and radars with Ukrainian systems. And we're not totally clear what that means exactly. The Pentagon also itemized Bradley infantry fighting vehicles, M113 armored personnel carriers, anti-mine vehicles with ambush protection or MRAPs, and trailers designed for transporting heavy equipment. Additionally, the aid package encompasses TOW missiles, Javelin and AT-4 anti-tank systems, HARM missiles, small arms and ammunition, explosive ordnance and demining equipment, river patrol boats, and equipment for chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear protection. There's a lot of stuff in this $400 million package. On May 10th, the package was unveiled, and the Department of State confirmed that. Ukrainian state prosecutors have scrutinized remnants from around 21 of 50 North Korean ballistic missiles fired from Russia during late December to late February, probing the ramifications of Moscow's collaboration with Pyongyang. Confronted with a shortfall in domestic ammunition and constrained access to global markets, Russia has turned to North Korea for aid in its war with Ukraine. In return, Russia has assisted Pyongyang in unlocking frozen international assets and providing oil products. While North Korean missiles constitute only a small portion of Russia's attacks, their utilization has raised concerns among global observers, potentially disrupting nearly 2 decades of UN Security Council consensus aimed at curbing Pyongyang's nuclear and missile programs. Andrei Kostin, Ukraine's chief prosecutor, disclosed to Reuters that the inquiry also unveiled a significant failure rate among the North Korean missiles. Roughly half the North Korean missiles veer off their designated trajectories and detonate in midair. In a January assault on Kyiv, Russia aimed at the city with at least one North Korean ballistic missile, believed to be either a KN-23 or KN-24 model. Debris was recovered following the missile's interception. On February 7th, Kharkiv, according to their regional police, Russia used 2 North Korean missiles in a barrage of 5 missiles to target the city. As per a report by Ukraine's air forces, among the 6 ballistic missiles Russia launched against Ukraine on the morning of February 15th, one perhaps was a Korean KN-23 missile. In March, South Korea revealed that North Korea had dispatched approximately 7,000 shipping containers loaded with munitions and equipment to Russia since last year, and multiple sources have, of course, confirmed that the DPRK is extensively supplying artillery shells to Russia. EU ambassadors have reached an agreement to allocate the proceeds from tax excess profits of frozen Russian assets to Ukraine, as reported by the Belgian presidency of the European Council in 2024. During a meeting held on May 8th, they decided to take action regarding the extraordinary proceeds from immobilized assets of Russia. However, the decision of the permanent representative still awaits finalization by the Council of the European Union. It's been suggested that the funds could be utilized for the reconstruction of Ukraine and also to bolster Ukrainian defense efforts. The Belgian presidency of the Council of the EU stated that the money, they're going to use the money. The approval of the ministers is still required for the legal text, which proposes to allocate 90% of the proceeds to an EU-administered fund for military assistance to Ukraine, and the remaining 10% earmarked for other forms of support for Ukraine. As previously noted, the Group of Seven, or the G7, froze approximately $300 billion worth of Russian financial assets, and the United States has advocated for seizing the assets entirely. Europe has expressed some reservations about this, and instead they, of course, have proposed, as I'm saying, this concept of taking the profits from those seized assets. The EU estimates that the windfall profits from the assets held within the bloc will amount to between 15 and 20 billion by 2027. On April 26, Ukraine's agriculture minister Mykola Solsky was apprehended by the High Anti-Corruption Court and was instructed to post a $2 million bail. The action came after Solsky tendered his resignation a day earlier, which was accepted by Parliament on May 9th. He faces allegations of embezzling state-owned land valued at $10 million and attempted to unlawfully acquire an additional $6.3 million worth of land between 2017 and 2021 before his tenure as agriculture minister. Solsky's arrest is a landmark event in Ukraine's anti-corruption efforts, marking the first time a sitting minister has been arrested and charged by the country's anti-corruption bodies. Investigated by the National Anti-Corruption Bureau, or NABU, the case not only exposes alleged misconduct by a high-ranking official, but highlights the challenges Ukraine confronts in combating corruption and reforming its land privatization procedures, which have been exposed by oligarchs and officials since the 1990s. Solsky is expected of misappropriating state-owned land valued at around $10 million and attempting to seize an additional $6.3 million worth of land, as I mentioned. However, the minister denies the accusations. Investigators asserted that Solsky led a criminal group involving officials from the state land agency, the survey agency, and individuals responsible for overseeing it. It's called the Geocadastre, I think, and I'm assuming that means like the state land survey agency. The scheme involved destroying documents granting to two state enterprises in Sumy Oblast the right to use lands permanently. With the documents missing, the regional state survey agency issued notices of unauthorized occupation of the land, and then the land was subsequently transferred to predetermined individuals with the help of the agency. And between 2021 and 2017, the scheme allegedly resulted in the misappropriation of 1,200 land plots. And currently, there are hundreds of similar cases under investigation of Ukraine. NABU, the corruption institution, reports 11 criminal cases related to the activities of the National Academy of Sciences involving land, and these cases are all part of these large. These cases are all part of a larger trend or a larger situation involving large land plots inherited from the USSR that were not legally privatized but exploited by private companies using dubious schemes. So in 1991, of course, they had all this Soviet public land that was owned, for state enterprises. It was all kind of privatized en masse. Some of it, though, wasn't quite done through legitimate means or through proper means, proper channels. So there's a lot of kind of shady business that goes on around these land deals. So there's various cases, anti-corruption cases involving it. The case represents the first instance of an incumbent minister being accused of embezzlement and arrested by the country's anti-corruption bodies. Since its inception, the Anti-Corruption Court has issued 184 verdicts in corruption or abuse cases and has been increasingly productive over time. Notable convictions include MPs, judges, state enterprise managers, and municipal council heads. Current proceedings involve cases like Vasyl Lozinski, Andriy Klocho, and these all highlight the efforts of Ukraine to address corruption at all levels of their government and society. According to the Energy Minister's report on May 11th, Ukraine has received emergency electricity assistance from Poland, Romania, and Slovakia due to the ongoing power deficit caused by Russia's attacks on energy infrastructure. The assistance comes after Russia launched another significant attack on May 8th, targeting energy infrastructure in central and western Ukraine, marking the fifth assault on the power network this year. Ukrenergo, the state-owned energy operator, issued a warning on May 10th about a substantial shortage of electricity in the country. Nationwide power outages have so far been avoided, but there is a rolling blackout schedule that has been implemented for Kharkiv and Kryvyi Rih. On May 10th, individual consumers face restrictions from 6 p.m. to 6:30 a.m., so in other words, at night, as reported by the Energy Ministry. During the evening peak hours, Ukraine is expected to receive emergency assistance from Poland, Romania, and Slovakia. The emergency supply from abroad so far accounts for less than 1% of daily consumption. And the minister stated on May 5th that Russian attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure have so far inflicted around $1 billion worth of damage. According to a Bloomberg report, the Pentagon has devised a solution to counter the Russian military's unauthorized use of the Starlink internet terminals. John Plum, the outgoing Assistant Secretary for Space Policy, who heads the U.S. Department of Defense's Space Policy Division, stated that the Pentagon has found a method to prevent the Russian military from utilizing Starlink internet terminals without authorization. While the United States already opposes the use of Starlink terminals by the Russian military, Plum believes that Russia is attempting to circumvent the restrictions. He refrained from specifying the tactic used or the methods or procedures being employed to counter the Russian use of Starlink. Regarding issues with Starlink in Ukraine, on February 9th, Militarny reported that SpaceX has taken measures to prevent Ukraine's military from utilizing the internet service. Gwynne Shotwell, SpaceX's president and chief operating officer, stated that the Starlink internet service, which has been supporting Ukraine's military operations with broadband communications, was never intended for military use. According to Shotwell, the use of Starlink with drones exceeds the scope of the agreement that SpaceX has with the Ukrainian government. Subsequently, in September 2023, it was reported that Elon Musk had transferred control of some of the Starlink satellite communication terminals used by the Defense Forces to the Pentagon directly. The decision was driven by Musk's desire to distance himself from any responsibility related to the Russian-Ukrainian war. In February 2024, reports emerged indicating that Russian forces were increasingly utilizing Starlink for terminals and in occupied territory in Ukraine. In response to the reports, Elon Musk dismissed the information as false, asserting that SpaceX did not sell the satellite terminals to Russia, which, again, they're using third-party suppliers. Ukraine has restarted its production of artillery ammunition, but due to the substantial demands of its defense forces, the country still relies on ammunition imports from partner nations, according to the Minister of Strategic Industries, Alexander Kamyshin. He claims that they've initiated the production of artillery ammunition, but similar to other resources, the domestic production alone will not suffice, no matter how much they manufacture. Kamyshin underscored that the current war is the most significant of the generation, surpassing the collective defense capabilities of all free world nations. He stressed that the focus is not on meeting the entire needs of the Ukrainian defense forces, which are immense, but rather on becoming a substantial contributor to the supply chain. The minister identified three primary challenges confronting Ukrainian defense industry: funding, shelling, and global scarcity of explosives and gunpowder for artillery production. And he says everything else has ceased to be a challenge. Highlighting the evolving nature of the defense industry, he emphasized the openness and transparency in dealings with European partners, which is crucial for attracting investments to enhance their defense capabilities. The EU-Ukraine Defense Industry Forum, where Kamyshin spoke, convened in Brussels on May 6th and brought together over 350 participants, including representatives from government bodies and European enterprises. The primary objective of the forum is to bolster and integrate the Ukrainian defense industry within the framework of the European defense sector at large. This aims to meet Ukraine's immediate requirements for weaponry and military equipment while also enhancing European defense production capabilities. So that wraps up my news for this week. So I believe up next we'll go over to German Aid to Ukraine for his report. German Aid to Ukraine, over to you.
Hello everyone. As always, I will present the most important news from Germany regarding aid to Ukraine. Starting with Wednesday, financed by the German government, 20 off-road vehicles worth around 550,000 euros were handed over to explosive ordnance disposal units of the Ukrainian National Police. These vehicles are to be used in the regions on the front line, and more vehicles are to be handed over later this year. On Thursday, during a surprise visit to Ukraine, the German Minister for Economic Cooperation and Development, Svenja Schulze, pledged further assistance to Ukraine. A grant agreement worth 45 million euros was signed between the German state-owned investment and development bank KfW and Ukrenergo. Sorry, butchered that name a couple of times earlier. The funds will be used to repair damaged parts of the electricity grid infrastructure and to make it more protected, more efficient, and therefore less vulnerable to attacks. On the same day, the German Minister of Defense, Boris Pistorius, announced during his visit to the US that Germany is buying 3 M142 HIMARS from US stocks for Ukraine. The 3 HIMARS will be delivered shortly, as the emergency clause was invoked to authorize an immediate foreign military sale. And thanks to Colby, who was also here for keeping an eye on it. And as the last item of this week, I want to provide you with some updates on the German Immediate Action on Air Defense initiative, which aims to strengthen Ukraine's air defense in the short term. First, we got the confirmation that Lithuania is taking part in the German initiative, although it is not yet known how they will contribute. Earlier, it was stated by official Lithuanian and German sources that they plan to join with air surveillance radars. Second, Canada officially announced its contribution of around 52 million euros. According to the German Ministry of Defense, the funds will be used to buy IRIS-T or IRIS-TSL missiles for the IRIS-T-SLM air defense systems or SLS launchers, which will be delivered to Ukraine already in the coming weeks. The German Minister of Defense, Boris Pistorius, also announced that Germany has received commitments from different nations for additional missiles for both the Patriot air defense systems and I'm now quoting Pistorius, the French one, which is, I think, most likely SAMT in the context of this initiative. And yeah, that's everything I had for this week. Thanks.
So next will be the interview that I had last week with Petro Andryushchenko, who is the advisor to the mayor of Mariupol, Vadim Boychenko. Andryushchenko is a politician and an activist, and in the last couple of years, he became the voice of Mariupol and of the resistance of Mariupol. He was born on May 18, 1975. He studied at Donetsk Police School. He got a specialization in jurisprudence and became a lawyer. And after that, he worked in several internal bodies of Ukraine. And he has been working in state fiscal services of Ukraine for many years. In 2014, he became a member of the board of the public organization Razom, which means together in Ukrainian, and he is dedicated to upholding the principles of the Revolution of Dignity. As said, when the war broke out in 2022, he became the voice of Mariupol through his Telegram channel, Andrish Time. I was lucky to have this interview with him where we are covering what is the situation in Mariupol during the Russian occupation. So I guess, Erlend, you can start the video. So, Mr. Petro Andryushchenko, thank you very much for being with us today. It's a very honored to have you here. You are the voice of Mariupol in these days. Can you please make a short introduction about yourself and explain your role as an advisor to the mayor of Mariupol?
Thanks for you, first of all, because not just for this, not just for the streaming, and for all what you've done for us, for Ukraine and me, and for Mariupol. First of all, what about me? I'm advisor of Mayor of Mariupol. I'm working with him 3 years ago. I think before the Russian invasion, I work with touristic line like my part of my job. It was a promotion of Mariupol, art promotion, culture promotion, touristic promotion, and some advice in that, and of course, social media promotion, not just in Ukraine and on border, of course, but after invasion, I must do what I do now, what I'm doing, and I hope I'm enough successful in that situation. Of course, I didn't think about that kind of promotion of Mariupol actually, but who knows?
I see. But what you're doing these days is extremely important. I mean, I've been following what's going on in the city, and you're a very important source of information.
Well, thanks. I'll try to do that. Of course, it's a main part of my job now, and it's a part of our resistance, not just me, our team, and Mariupol resistance. We work together because the information about true of inside Mariupol, about Russian occupied authority, about our people in occupation, about children, and what is the real as Russian occupation is, because everyone can see what Russian want to show for all the world, but the truth different, completely different. It's other part of reality, because the Russian propaganda make everything for a line, of course, and lots of example, of course, and
and we are going to see many of those aspects of Russian propaganda during the interview today. But before we go on, can you describe how Mariupol was like before the invasion?
It must home. It's my home. It's very hard to describe. I very love Mariupol, because Mariupol, it was first of all the main thing I think that everyone must know about Mariupol. Mariupol, it was like the symbol after past years, after our war started in 2014. What the real Ukrainian city that choose Ukrainian and European values part, because it was very modern city. Not everything was good, of course, but we worked with that, with modern infrastructure, modern. It was the center, one of the center of modern art in Ukraine, absolutely, and it was the center, one of the social activity, of course, and democracy. We're very proud of that, because our local parliament, it's like one of the best example in Ukraine, really, how democracies work, and all kind of that. It was we saw our future, our nearest future without war, like one of the main city in Ukraine, and might be, who knows, one of the main city of Europe. Why not?
Yeah, sure, I understand. And now, unfortunately, we need to come to what Mariupol has become today. and I would like to start talking about the most important topic, which is the people of Mariupol. And my first question for you is, do you have any updated information about the number of people who were killed and are missing?
It's a very hard question because we have an unofficial number. We counted in the first year in 2022 with our regional authorities, and what we can say. I mean, I think you understand. Like a scene specialist, we count with our municipal specialist about cemetery. We find every mass graves, every cemetery in Mariupol, around the Mariupol, in the village and town around the Mariupol. All this my grave, and we think it sounds like the minimum 2,500,000 or 25,000 people were killed by Russians from the first year in invasion. It's official number, and I'm sure that this number isn't changing during the war, before the occupation of Mariupol, because it's impossible to count now. Of course, we have some other numbers. We predict about other numbers, but I heard lots of numbers, like, I don't know, 100,000 people and more now. I think it's around numbers, because it's like not a real numbers. It's like game of memories. People after all this shocked. Sometimes someone, I know some people who try to make a hype career, in social media with our numbers, and I really agree, but I'm so angry about that. But real numbers, nobody knows.
Yeah,
of course, Russian knows. They have numbers and very close to real numbers, because they graving our people and they count and they have data. But unfortunately, all this data isn't in online, just offline base, and we're trying to get it. Doesn't matter how, but we're trying. We try to buy it. We're trying to store it, but unfortunately, we have just one numbers that we absolutely showed and verified now, because we bought a list of dead children in Mariupol. And for now, after the verification, I can say in Mariupol in 2022, we have 164 children were killed by Russian. So it's the most real numbers, because it's numbers from Russian lists, and our lists, and we verified it. So might be more. But for now, we haven't any data about that, any numbers, and Russians haven't other numbers about children. So just we understood that just the occupation, exhumation, expertise, all kind of the stuff can help any other way.
And also, you were referring to the mass graves, and for sure, a lot of bodies have been hidden or made disappear by the Russians.
Some percent of people disappeared in demolished buildings, of course, because the second half of 22nd years, Russians sometimes demolished our buildings with bodies of Mariupol people without exhumation, just everything in a rubbish. So it's It's
And
real.
that's horror, real horror. And my next question is, do you know more or less how many of the original inhabitants of Mariupol are still in the city? So the people, Ukrainians who lived there before the invasion, how many of them do you think are still in the city?
Okay, before the invasion in 2021, we made a big research about how many people in Mariupol. It's not like official research, like official number, but it's a real number, and we have more than 500,000 and 500,036 people in Mariupol, were before the invasion. For now, we can say in Mariupol stay near them 80,000 of original Mariupol people. Not like all the population of Mariupol now, of course, we have a different number, but original Mariupol people who staying in Mariupol now, it's all ages. It's 80,000.
Okay, 80,000. Yes. And do you know, is it mainly old people or
Yeah.
all ages?
Sure. Mainly it's retired people.
Okay.
More than 60% of all these numbers, it's retired people. And we know how many children, and near 13,000 children in Mariupol now, original Mariupol children, of course, Ukrainian children.
Yes.
So mainly, the main part of adults, of course, it's retired people. So absolutely clear story.
Okay, but we know that also other people now live in the city, and they are Russians, for sure, they're military personnel and construction workers. I've seen a lot of videos. Can you talk about a little bit about those other people living in Mariupol now? Who they are?
Yeah, it's a sad story for us because the balance we can see the balance in Mariupol and population now in Mariupol near the 150,000 people, all people. And first of all, the biggest part of Russians, it's workers. It's near than 60,000 people, I think, for now, with families, with children, and it's very fast. Faster than we think before. They change the population in Mariupol from Ukrainian to Russian people, of course, and some part near from 10 to 20,000 people. It's a servicemen. Russian servicemen, it's like a guard of Mariupol with their defense forces, Russian guard forces, all kind of this. So the main part it's civilian Russians, and now we can see, we in a point of like we say, it's a second wave started now of removing. So what the Russian do? They change some ethnic part of Russian people in Mariupol to other ethnic part of Russian people in Mariupol. It calls some strange, but it's reality. And we in a point of growing of Russian population in a city, and it's a really sad story because all the Russian making in Mariupol is just for Russian people now, not for Ukrainian people in Mariupol. It doesn't matter what about passport and like the de jure or an official. All the people in Mariupol who stay now in Mariupol are staying Russian citizen. It doesn't matter. All the Russian make, it's just for Russians.
So not even changing to a Russian passport can help the people from Mariupol. They are discriminated anyway.
Yeah, Russian passport doesn't help for stop of discrimination,
Yeah.
It's absolutely a strange story because, as for me, the best example is about Russian mobilization now in this city, because the Russian official said that it doesn't matter as you have a Russian passport or as you have just Ukrainian passport, you have to go to Russian army. You know, it's strange when the people from the other citizens have to service in a Russian army, or if we look back to an illegal Russian election in Mariupol, you know, you can vote by the Ukrainian passport. It's very strange when the Ukrainian citizen can elect the Russian president, you know.
Because they wanted to have as many people as possible to be part of the election. But of course, it's all fake. We know that.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. It was very interesting information. One last thing, it's about, construction workers. I've seen that a lot of people from Central Asia came to Mariupol to work and rebuild, more or less. And now I see that Russian police is going behind them.
Yeah.
That happened in Moscow last month.
It's a very strange and very interesting story in the same time, you know. They called it migrant, like migrant, but it isn't true. The main idea of this story, all these people, near the 100% of these Asia's people have a Russian passport. They are Russian citizens. No, Russian don't talk about that, because it's a strange when the Russian citizen can talk Russian, for example, you know. But they have Russian passports, and what the Russian police and Russian as army police are doing now in Mariupol, they mobilized, because when you have when you got a Russian passport, you have to go to the Russian army services, like I don't know how to say in English. So it's like when Kamat, like when you in Russian army service datas, you know, you have to be on the Russian lists, like potential people for mobilization. So if you don't, you are arrested and go to this special army serviceman, army point. And after that, they wake up on a front line, you know. So they, in this situation, the Russian are clean from these Asian people now, the Mariupol, in this way.
Yeah, I believe I saw a video. I don't know if it was your channel yesterday about the police collecting like 20 workers, and then the comment was they will appear in Chasiv Yar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a normal story for Russians, you know. And the sadness in this situation is the Ukrainian people, the Ukrainian men in Mariupol, it's a future for our people. It's a closer future for us, for our people. I mean, after they got a Russian passport, the same way.
Yeah. The next question that I have for you is about the reconstruction. You have spoken about these workers, and in my opinion, the most important part of the reconstruction is the Russian propaganda. Because personally, I don't know if you have seen my map, but I've been monitoring the destruction and the so-called reconstruction of Mariupol.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Of course, I saw it. I like it. Really. Thank you for that.
Thank you very much. And it looks like that more demolitions have started. I saw the DOSAF building in city center that was demolished this week. Do you have updated estimate about how many housing units have been lost? Yeah.
Yeah, I have a number, the closest number. Of course, we need just more, I think, numbers, because in Mariupol we had
Yeah.
2,020, near the 2,000
Yeah.
buildings.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
a big buildings, not like private buildings. Private buildings, it's absolutely other story. So, and after the Russian invasion, they destroyed and absolutely impossible to use for now, near the 100 buildings. And last years, they demolished near the near the 500 people or 100 buildings. Now they started again, let's say so. So yeah, they have to destroy after finally they have to destroy 100 and or 1,160 buildings they decided to destroy for all this time. And it might be final numbers for now, because it's like the south buildings and our Levoberezhny district are completely destroyed, and now they demolished it. So
is that the district on the left bank close to that area is terrifying. There is nothing left. I mean,
nothing left.
It's terrible. I use a more updated map than the one of Google, and it's terrible. There is nothing left.
No, it's believe me, it's actually it's terrible story about all our city, because just one region in Mariupol, administrative region in Mariupol, not so destroyed. It's Kalmiovsky region on the right bank, near the factory of Ilicha. All the other regions, it's awful. It's awful. The central region destroyed all this historical and administrative parts. So just border, some just border places. I don't know. And Primorsky region, and one of the clearest and the most popular region in Mariupol for people, destroyed. And Levoberezhny in left bank destroyed. It's awful. Half of city, half of the building are absolutely destroyed.
And as you said, as you said, the private houses are even impossible to make account of them. They're all destroyed. When I was working on my map, I was looking at the private sector. I tried to document them. The demolition, it's impossible to track, because everything is in dust.
Yeah, agree. Be sure it's impossible.
Still, when we have all this destruction, Russia propaganda is trying to promote a narrative of a rebuilt city. Starting already in 2022, I believe in June already, they were saying we rebuilt Mariupol. And sometimes I watch Russian YouTube channels to see what they tell. And I see a city that seems to be like new, with tiny, bright buildings. But can you tell us if they are really restored and what is behind those facades?
We have some at the same time, some different story about this fake reconstruction of Mariupol. First of all, an official number. If you talk about new buildings, I think it's one of the important things in Russia propaganda and like brilliant in Russia propaganda, all this kind of like Nevsky, all other new buildings. So, but we have a number, they demolished for this year, they demolished for near the 33,500 flats in the buildings, and they're planning to get for our people, and they build when they planning to the end of the rebuilding and new buildings and new flats, and they planning to have in the end of this year 5,500 buildings, flats. It's with other destroyed flats, and it's less than 10% of all flats were destroyed in Mariupol. So it's not reconstruction, it's something fake, as for me. And it's a one part of but what can I talk about new buildings and what can I talk about reconstruction? Because lots of our people can see, and they said it's a like fake reconstruction, and our people inside Mariupol joked it's like makeup of buildings, so they repaint the buildings outside, but inside all destroyed after the fire, like after the shelling. It's the same ruin like it was after the Russian invasion, but outside of the buildings look like a new, what do you say it about bright colors and something like that, but inside it's full empty, about no people, no flats, no reconstruction inside, just a fake, just a fake picture outside for Russian propaganda. That it's.
I did put many examples also in my map of buildings like the Zihuli, if I'm saying correctly, which is bright on the outside. You've got new windows, but the inside is empty. It's burned like the day it was hit by a tank. And I don't know if my suggestion to the people who see the pictures of Mariupol today, they should look at the windows, because all the windows are new, but you will see that no one is living there. There are no curtains. So all of those, let's say, new buildings, they are not new. They're burned and repainted, but they are empty.
It's why, by the way, I'm sure you know, you absolutely know, we never, Russians never showed the Mariupol in the evening when the people have to switch on the lights inside the building. Because after that, all this night photos, all this night video, and we can see it's empty buildings, empty regions, empty city. The Russians don't want show all this real picture for the world. It's not like bright picture. You can't see the bright picture in the night, but you can see the light in the window, or you can't see the light in the window. Depends on, So it's why just all this Russia propaganda people try take photo or take video just in a day.
And that I had planned this question for later, but I want to jump to it because you mentioned, because Russia propaganda is showing a glamorous city. If I search for Mariupol on Instagram, the most recent posts are beautiful influencers that are dining at the local restaurants. I counted 3 restaurants, to be honest, but they made me bored. So they're trying to present a really alive city, but you are saying that the city is not alive. The city is dead. It's dark on nights. There are not people around.
Yeah, it's a like city of the ghost, you know,
Mm.
in reality, because just a one restaurant for Mariupol, really, it's impossible for from our future. Russian every time lies about the kind of life, the numbers of people in Mariupol. They said near 300,000 people in Mariupol. It's absolutely lie, because and why? They have just one cinema, just one real restaurant. Of course, they have two restaurants, because the second restaurant is just for Russian servicemen, actually. So, but yeah, in reality, any infrastructure for people, for these numbers of people, just infrastructure for real numbers of people, because retired people in Mariupol and now in the past, they are inclined for restaurant or cafe in the evening. It's sad, but reality. So yeah, I absolutely agree with you.
Yeah.
No infrastructure, and this point of view, as for me, are brighter than all this Russia propaganda, really, because it's just the words. We can see the real picture.
Yes, but the Russians, they're claiming that they are providing new homes to the people who lost them, and you already said they are not going to build enough flats for the people. But can you confirm? And you said that Ukrainians are discriminated, but can you say if Ukrainians can have any rights to receive a new house? Because what I've seen on the local channels, it seems very difficult for people to claim their own apartments if they still exist. I know that they had to meet in person with the original documents, and it doesn't make it impossible for people who left Mariupol to claim their properties.
Yeah.
Sometimes Russians even change the address. So people have the documents, but they cannot claim their house because the address on the documents is different. So can you tell us if Ukrainians are able to get anything?
It's impossible for Ukrainians who in evacuation, in reality, because Russians think and they are doing like it's a stealing. They're stealing all our property, really, because we can't do nothing with that. I'm sorry.
Problem.
We can't do nothing with that, and you can't. You know, you haven't any official. They don't. Don't take our official documents. Don't want to take our official documents. So, for us, they said you are not an owner of your property, and we can't back to Mariupol, of course, in occupation. So for now, we lost our city. We lost our property, all our property in Mariupol. They try to, they may provide a big company campaign of nationalization of our property. It's one part of that. But for people who stay in a city, it's the same thing. It's sometimes impossible because they haven't dates, a base about property, and you have to have special documents, but Ukrainian documents isn't working occupation. So the Russians said, it's your problem. It's not your property. Or if they want to take your property for their own, it's the same thing. So any rights, finally, any rights, you haven't any rights in Mariupol. If you are Mariupol people, if you Ukrainian citizen, and as you have a Russian passport now, it's the same thing. You haven't any rights for us. It's absolutely discriminated. All the people, and they don't do nothing for changing property. If they demolished our flat house, I don't know, doesn't matter. when they started an occupation, they said we change your destroyed and demolished buildings, houses, flats for new, and for now, no. I said the numbers here. With 10%, they built just 10% from destroyed flats. And we don't talk about a private house because, it's more and more numbers. After that, they said we can give you money for that. And for now, they stop all this program, just nothing. You have to stay, you have to think, you have to dream about property, but you can't have nothing. You know.
At the same time, on social media, I've seen many examples of Russians, so regular Russians, that are going out claiming that they bought houses in Mariupol, and sometimes they are completely destroyed as they wait for their government to pay for the restoration in the future. And I also remember on Twitter, a Russian guy openly saying, well, we arrived, no one was there, so we took them out. So they even steal the houses in the safe. They admit it.
Yeah, it's a corruption. It's a question about Russian corruption in reality, because they try to buy the houses, or sometimes just documents for houses. If the houses was demolished, no problem. They back to their region authorities like St. Petersburg, like Lipetsk, and it's a corruption net, and they have money from the budget for this demolished city. It's just not for all Russian. It's just for people who are very close to authorities. Yeah. But it's very popular thing because Russia, a really big country, lots of regional authorities, huge corruption, So it's not a real market. It's just corruption.
To make money and corruption. Yes, I see. So again, you were talking about the fact that Ukrainians who live in Mariupol do not have rights. And one very important right for people is the healthcare services. Recently, I have read several news reports about the poor quality of healthcare services that are available to the population. And even if I know that Russia had built a big medical center near Donetsk, but can you please describe the situation for the citizens who need healthcare help?
I think all the infrastructure in Mariupol now, it's first of all medical infrastructure is for me, I think, in the main story. We talked about some municipal infrastructure and municipal services for people. It's in collapse, absolutely. They haven't enough medical staff. They haven't a specialist. Sometimes they haven't a special items and special techniques for our people. It's awful, absolutely. And they haven't enough medicine. And very interesting thing, because our pills, our medicine, of course, it's other kind of. Like we work with European quality, we work with European protocols and international protocols. Russian quality completely different. It's the worst, like in the Soviet Union in our past. So the Russian medicine doesn't help. Sometimes for our people, like insulin and all kind of this stuff. It's a very big problem for for people who have a chronic illness, first of all. So, and finally, we have the most highest level of death in Mariupol from the natural. And if we talk about our real numbers. When we have a first COVID wave, the awful, I'm sure that everyone remember this wave, and highest level of deaths everywhere in Mariupol and half million city. We have near the 150 people die by week. For now in Mariupol we have for 80,000 people, so like for 5 times minimum less than in a COVID. We have near the 300-400 person by week. It's awful, really.
You're talking about people who die every week?
Yeah, near the 300 people minimum die every week in Mariupol now. I mean Ukrainian people by the natural, like after the illness, after by the age, by natural story. So it's awful, really. It's and they can't manage this situation. But sometimes we think we have theory about that, so it's absolutely they know what they do. I mean Russian, so it's not so hard to manage this situation. Really, you recognize what the problem. You have enough doctors in Russia. You can get it to Mariupol. Why not? In reality, but not.
Yeah, I think they prefer to invest in painting the buildings instead of getting medicine.
The real infrastructure is the same thing, It's like if we back to the picture, the bright picture from Mariupol, any elevator work in Mariupol, you live on, I don't know, 8th, 9th floor, and every day you have to walk by foot. Sometimes not once. So they said, is everything okay? They restored everything, but it isn't true. The water, it's awful. It's the next awful story. Because the water is technical water. It's not water for drinking. They can't use, our people can't use this water for cooking, actually, but they have to, because they haven't enough money for water in bottles. So it's a problem. After that, we have a highest level of illness. We have a cholera. We have other kind of stomach illness, first of all. So other infection, it's a problem. It's a big problem, and nothing, Russia nothing to do with that. I don't know why. Really, I don't know why. It's not so big question. It's not so big, I don't know, a big technical decision, and something like that. It's a very, very clear answer for this question. You can manage all the story. With all this money they put to Mariupol. Why not? I don't know.
And I'm happy that you mentioned the problem with the water, because I have seen the video from last week with somebody tapping water and using a filter. And the white filter becomes totally unusable after 30 seconds, I believe. At the end of the minute of the video, it's completely brown.
Yeah, so, because they use now from invasion. We have in Mariupol, Mariupol, it was on front line all these years. From 2014, we are on a front line. And sometimes we haven't water, like a normal from the normal channel, from the Seversky Donetsk, like for normal water. So we found like reserved for water, but it can be used for just for the short time. After that, but you see, really the situation. They use the reserve channel more than 2 years. It's impossible. The kind of water is awful. It's a real technical water. They can't be used for drinking, for cooking, for daily routine, for daylight. So finally, the photo is the main question for illness, as for me, is one of the main things. So we have a result, a highest level of the death.
Stand. Now I would like to change a little bit the topic, but we are still talking about people. And I would like you to share some insights about collaborationists. So if you have any estimate about how many people switched sides and are now collaborating with the occupiers. And in my head, I've got a couple of examples. Now I'm going to struggle with the names, but one is Mariana
Oh yeah,
Vishnyevskaya.
Vishnyevskaya.
Yeah, she was almost killed during the bombing of the maternity hospital, and now is campaigning for Putin in Russia. And the other person is Natalia Kapustnikova.
Mhm.
She was the leader of the Museum of Local History, and now she's back in Mariupol to promote an exhibition about ordinary Nazism. So these people, were they forced to switch sides, or they've been motivated by personal interest at the time?
Yeah, but what can I say about Mariana? It's I haven't normal words about these people, just a junk words, but I try be with a clear. So yeah, she was a pro-Russian every time, from pro-Russian family. We have near the 10% in Mariupol are really pro-Russian active for. It's abnormal, but it's reality. It's absolutely, it's a minimal level of social activity, minimal level of education, minimal level of all kind of this stuff, and we have pro-Russian people. So, and she was from this, and she is from this family, so it's absolutely unsurprised. And in reality, for me, I'm absolutely unsurprised for everyone. What can I, for every people that I can see who collaborated with Russians. So it's absolutely predicted. Really, because we were very tolerant in Mariupol before, not just in Mariupol, in Ukraine, like with European values, all kind of this stuff, tolerance. But we have to think about our national security more, and it's not just about us, it's just about all Europe now. Values, it's okay if you are not in a danger point. But now we know everyone is danger point because we have a Russian. So finally, yeah, it's absolutely unsurprising. Not so many people, really. Absolutely, we predicted, and we saw it now. So not a big problem. We back in Mariupol, and revenge, it will be, believe me. So I know you're reading our Mariupol resistance, and you have a conversation with them. So you have to be sure about that. Revenge is on the road, of course. So, but what can I say? Mariana is Mariana. She started alive from the first day after the bombarding our pregnant house,
Yes.
This Kapustnikova, it's a very interesting story, because all these people who worked in our museum, they started in Soviet Union or for the art, so in Soviet Union university, it's not the Ukrainian people mentally, the Russian people mentally. So, but we haven't any other specialist for now. So we have to. But she tried to stole our Queen picture.
I know the story. there is another team member of our team.
I think
Gonna
if we
help-
talk about some pro-Russian people like she, yeah, I think it's a very bright story. As for me, yeah, who is she? She's thief.
Good. Could you tell a bit of that story, because not everyone who is listening to the interview today knows that. So it would be
Yeah,
nice.
We
Good
have
example.
of course. We have our national treasure. We had a national treasure in Mariupol. Two pictures of Arkhip Kuinji, and as I remember, one picture of Azovsky. So it's a real national treasure of Ukraine. And Arkhip Kuinji, it's very famous painter. It's like pre-impressionist in the world. And he was from Mariupol, so it's our soul. So, and we have an original picture when the Russian invasion was started. We hide it in museum, but finally we know she stole it from museum to their home. But we have a copy of all this picture as for public. Sometimes we use it when we frightened about our original picture. So she changed the original picture for the original painting for the copy. And when the Russian occupied the city, and she gave it for them, the copy, the Russian made an expertise and understood that is copy. And after that, she must to get it, them original picture from the home. And we have, I think you see, and everyone can see the video when she from the home took this picture and got it for Russians. So they really, we understand. I know she tried to steal it, but actually it's not a question about picture. We have some other national treasure in Mariupol, like old books, historical books, the first print of books, like all kind of that. And she stole it with one person in Mariupol. We know about that, and we absolutely sure she stole it. So, but finally we know it. We find it after the occupation. Be sure.
So that's my last question for you today, is about the future, because we know that currently the situation is extremely difficult for the Ukrainian armed forces, also for the civilians all around the country. But we know that the events can change, and our hope is to see all Ukraine, but especially Mariupol, to be liberated again. So I would like to close the interview with your view about the future. You really say anything about the future?
Our future very clear. We'll win this war, of course. We haven't any chance. We haven't any chance. I want to. I think everyone in Ukraine understand, but everyone in Europe had to be understood, and the world had to. We haven't a point of with Russian for negotiation. The Putin and Russian want to destroy Ukraine like a country, want to destroy Ukraine like a political nation, not like ethnic nation, and they want to kill everyone in Ukraine or make just a slave from us. So any chance for us. So, and they don't want to stop. Sometimes they want to have a gap for to make more ammunition, to mobilize people, but it's not a real peace, the point of peace. And we understand that we haven't any chance. Or we'll win this war, or the Poland and Baltic countries next. And not just Poland, not just Baltic country. Believe me, all the Europe is next after Ukraine. So we'll win and we'll back in in a city. We sure. We don't believe. We sure in that story.
Really hope that is going to happen, and that is going to happen very soon. So thank you very much for being with us today. It was extremely interesting. And well, can I say Slava Ukraini?
Героям слава.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm sorry that we have some issues with the audio of the interview today. We will be looking to re-upload it separately with an improved audio. So hopefully you were able to enjoy it and to find it informative. It was very emotional for myself to speak directly with Petro. And yeah, I hope that it will help to bring out some of the truth from Mariupol, because right now the Russian propaganda about the city is really extreme, but of course it's propaganda, so it's all lies. That's what that I have tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alex. So very quickly before we move to our next segment, we do have some sort of brief breaking news. So apparently, as was mentioned in our chat, Shoigu has been removed from his position, but it's sort of a complicated musical chairs that appears to be going on in the Kremlin. So this is all Kremlinology. We all have our Kremlinology hats on. It can all get a little bit... we don't want to make too many assumptions, I'll put it that way. But as of right now, it looks like Putin is removing Patrushev, or he is moving him to a new role. It's not specified. It's to be specified later. He'll be removed as basically Putin's #1 advisor, his job as the head of the Security Council in Russia. Shoigu will be taking that position. So it appears on the surface that Shoigu has been given basically a promotion. He's been promoted to like Putin's #1 advisor guy, as it were. And Patrushev, it appears, maybe got some kind of demotion, although that's not entirely clear, like I said, because his new position isn't named. And this can all be maybe not necessarily as straightforward as all that, right? So I think that's the main stuff. Shoigu will stay in charge of the Federal Service of Military Technical Cooperation, which is in charge of arms exports and other types of foreign defense cooperation. So that's all we pretty much know about it. Erlend, anything you want to add about the Shoigu thing before I turn it over to you for your segment, bud?
No, I think maybe we can talk about it a little bit later in an open conversation. But thank you, Joseph, and thank you, Alex, for doing that interview. It was really great, and a nice reference to the investigation that Jonathan ended up doing and was published last week. So if you didn't see that video, it's on our YouTube channel. It's about this stolen art that was talked about briefly at the end of the interview. Just want to say very much welcome to Jonathan Pearce, and thank you for joining us again. And he's a very good friend of Tochnyi. He's had several of our contributors regularly on the show, both Daniela and Colby and Germinate Ukraine that are here. And Andrew has been on Jonathan's stream. So yeah, I think you're muted, Jonathan. Can anyone else hear Jonathan?
Nope.
You're muted.
I can't.
Well, anyways, okay, he's rejoining. Hopefully there won't be any big technical problems now there. Well, Jonathan has been a really great friend of Tochnyi and also basically helped us a little bit on the way as well. So Jonathan, you're still not audible. Make sure, okay, if you go to the settings wheel, Jonathan, make sure that the audio input is the right microphone.
The Tochnyi boomer curse.
Oh no.
even people with like working audio, when they come into contact with us, their audio stops working.
Yeah, I don't know why we've had so many different technical problems lately. It makes me really frustrated. We can still not hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Excellent.
Oh, I'm so happy now.
The wrong microphone. Yeah, well done. Well done. Default settings. Thank you very much for all the kind words, and thanks for everyone who's come on my show. And you guys are doing an amazing job. It's just we're all kind of singing off the same song sheet. I was wondering, just on that Shoigu thing, is it worth striking while the iron is hot? The main point I would have to make there is that is this what you would do if things were going well? You know, if everything was going really, really well, then you don't fix what ain't broke. But if things aren't going very well, then this is the kind of activity that you would expect. Is that a broadly accurate synopsis?
Well, it's as Joseph mentioned, criminology is this thing where if you dive into it, it's really difficult, in my opinion, to find real good answers, and that's mainly been a thing for the last 80 years, right? In criminology, like no one really found good answers, in my opinion, about from the outside. I think analyzing it in a positive or negative note for Ukraine is going to be really difficult. But what we know is that Putin is a very, very particular person who is skeptical towards people inside his own administration, and we've seen that the last 2 years. It's not the first time he changes up very prominent military leaders as well. So
I think he's quite comfortable with Shoigu, though. So he's got that background with Shoigu where they've gone out hunting together. I think he feels they've got a lot in common to some extent, although there's very different cultural backgrounds. But my take is that Shoigu is safe for Putin. So Putin gets rid of anyone who's a threat. And I don't think he sees Shoigu as a threat, which is kind of why Shoigu's there. I don't think he's particularly well suited. He doesn't have the right CV to be defense minister, and yet he is. So the question has always been, well, why is he there? Well, is it because he isn't a threat? So someone like Surovikin was moved off to Algeria because he was kind of cozying up with Prigozhin, and Prigozhin fell out of an aeroplane. And those who are strong and threatening end up being on the wrong side of Putin. Those who acquiesce to Putin and who are seen as weak, Gerasimov and Shoigu, end up staying in their positions, or in this case, possibly being moved sideways. But that's my take on it. Not that that's much of a take.
I don't think that there's nothing wrong with that. I don't disagree. Anyways, I invited you because I was talking to Andrew and about inviting you, and he said let's talk about bigger picture stuff. So I got basically 2 questions that I sent you because they're kind of big, and I don't think we can start talking about a lot more topics than those 2 questions. But the first one is basically, how do you see Europe politically and socially on the war question, and also on defense policies in a year from now? And the reason why I ask you about this is because I know you have a background in philosophy, and I know you, and I guess also sociology, if I'm not wrong. Well, a little bit, yeah.
An interest, yeah.
An interest, yeah. And I would really like to hear your perspectives on these things.
Well, my thoughts on that, just off the top of my head, is that I think Russia realized they can't win on the battlefield. Really, like realistically, their maximalist goals are to, let's say, to take the whole of Ukraine. They started a war not as a war. It started as a special military operation. They thought they'd depose the government. It'll be over in 2 or 3 days. Spend a fortnight clearing it all up. And then as soon as they got into Ukraine, they realized they were accidentally in a war. And so 2 years later, they're still in this war without any real chance of even getting to Transnistria, right, and taking Odessa and taking that whole land bridge down to the border there. So if that's really not on the cards, if they can't win militarily, they don't have the required amount of staff, because Ukraine has all these friends in high places, then how can they win on a battlefield? Well, they have to change things, and they have to change who Ukraine has as friends or how their friends operate. And so what Russia are doing is what they're really good at, what they've got some good form in, which is getting involved in the democratic processes of the US, of Europe. So we've got, I mean, 2024 is a year of the most elections in the history of the Earth, right? So this is a super, super important year. I wrote an article some time back about how Russia are really successfully getting involved in stirring up particularly the right wing in Europe. Russia will stir up whoever is more useful to them. But in Europe, there are issues of immigration that are just presenting themselves to Russia, that they can amplify these issues and make them really divisive. And I think, therefore, the right wing is a much more suitable vehicle for them to sow discord in Europe than the far left, although there are elements of the far left that they can successfully stir up as well. But I just don't think it's as useful for them in the context of Europe. You can talk about Der Linke and German elements of the left, possibly, but mainly they're going around Europe stirring up the far right, so that the makeup of the European Union, the parliamentarians there, because we have an election, or we don't, UK no longer in Europe, in the EU, but the EU have their June MEP elections, member of European Parliament, and if they can get more and more people from a pro-Russian political standpoint to succeed based on other issues that aren't necessarily to do with the war, so they can weaponize immigration, for example, and get these MEPs in position in Europe, then and you add that to what they've done with Hungary and Slovakia and Serbia, who aren't in the EU, but they are doing those same sort of things, then Russia can have a huge amount of success politically. They don't have to change everyone. They just have to change enough people or influence enough people to cause paralysis. So you look at Hungary and how Hungary have been able to veto stuff in Europe from happening, and with Slovakia on board, then that's all they need to some degree. But going further, they can change the support Ukraine are getting, and that will have an effect on the battlefield further down the line. So if they can get the Marjorie Taylor Greens and the MAGA Republicans and Donald Trump to operate to their will in the US, then that stops aid coming into. I mean, they've already had 7 months of success, and possibly after November, further success. And in Europe, if they can have success in June, then Ukraine are looking like not having a sustainable supply of weaponry going forward, and that really challenges Ukraine's ability to prevail on the battlefield. Does that all make sense?
Yeah, and it definitely does. And we know that they've been really targeting European election bases hard for many years now, more than 10 years. And well, since the 3-day invasion of Kyiv didn't work, then really that has been their main weapon against Europe, in my opinion, and also against Ukraine. But they did there was one big kind of fail for them, and that was that Giorgia Meloni ended up, being this Atlanticist, whatever you can call it, leader of Italy. They don't necessarily help much with military support, but they at least make sure that the EU continue their support. Because if Italy would have ended up as a new Hungary, I think it would have been a very, very complicated affair to get those aid packages through the EU and the sanctions passed, etc. So I think that could actually be a bit of a roadblock for Putin.
Italy's an interesting one because she's in coalition. There are three parties. You've got Matteo Salvini's La Liga, you've got Giorgia Meloni's Brothers of Italy, and you've got Silvio Berlusconi, the late Berlusconi's party, and they're in coalition. And the other two parties, so Matteo Salvini and Berlusconi's parties, are much more pro-Putin. I mean, Berlusconi was a good friend of Putin. Matteo Salvini is still going around sounding off anti-Ukraine stuff. And so Italy itself is a bit kind of divided in terms of politically what they're saying. And I think that's why you've seen Giorgia Meloni say very strong things in terms of rhetoric to support Ukraine. And then you've got these other positions that come out recently, which is, oh yeah, but we're not going to allow Italian weapons to be sent into Russia, and we're definitely not going to send troops in any way, shape, or form, like Emmanuel Macron has stated. So even with Italy's positioning, I think there's some complexity there. But I watched a really interesting TLDR news video today talking about the right-wing splits in the European Parliament. So you've got a centre-right group. So what happens is you have all of these MEPs from different countries representing usually their parties back in their home country, and then as they are represented in the European Parliament, they get together in coalitions of similar-minded parties, and they form these groups in the European Parliament. And there's like a centre-right group, a much further right group, and there are schisms in these groups that mean that you have, Giorgia Meloni, positioning herself on one thing, and other right wingers positioning on other things, and there are interesting dynamics going on. For example, the Fidesz party were thrown out of or opted out of one of the far right groupings, and now wants back in. And I think Giorgia Meloni is saying, yes, you can come back in Fidesz, which is Viktor Orban, Hungary. But then there are other right leaders saying, no, you can't. And they're just, it's to think that the far right, or the right, sorry, and that's a big old broad church in Europe, are homogenous. Is problematic. So there are lots of different views within that, but certainly with regard to the far right populist side of things, like AfD in Germany, and Geert Wilders's PVV and other populist right parties, I think that is where Russia are getting a lot of return on investment, and if they can mobilize them to support to Russia a lot more, then that presents a real problem going forward in terms of, as mentioned, aid packages being put through, which is why there is, I think, a real clamor to get stuff done as soon as possible, to get things kind of contractually put in place, and why the US really want to get as much stuff done before November. And also why I think nations are wanting to make sure Ukraine have their indigenous, homegrown manufacturing put in place and functioning, so that if all goes wrong politically and the political winds change around Europe and in the US, Ukraine are at least in a better position than they were themselves.
So you're basically gonna have to start the wheels on the industrial machine, because when those wheels are rolling and steaming ahead, then shutting it down is going to cause so much destruction in terms of different nations' economic affairs, that it would be, even if you have a change in government, it would be really hard for them to pull that plug. You see that in Slovakia as well. I mean, they have now a government who doesn't want to send weapons that they pay for, but they're not stopping their industry from producing and selling weapons to Ukraine.
That's a really interesting position. So Robert Fico in charge of the Slovakian coalition, and he's supposedly a kind of centre-left populist, but actually he's in coalition with a super right-wing, like properly far-right group and another party, and his policies appear to be just far-right populism himself. Anyway, he's an interesting figure because he has said, as you said, that we are not going to provide weapons as an administration to Ukraine, but they can buy weapons off us. That's fine, because we don't want to compromise our economy, which is, from a philosophical point of view, really, really dodgy. So it's to say that, this is really wrong. We're not going to do it because it's wrong. But if you pay us to do it, we'll do it. It's essentially what he's saying. Yeah. So it's like, what? That is like, if it's wrong, you should not be doing it at all, if you genuinely think that is the wrong way to do things. So anyway, I have a real problem with Robert Fico's double standards there. But yeah, so it's really important that I think Europe ramps up production capacities and manufacturing, not only to support Ukraine, but because, and this is kind of where I was thinking about going today, but because I think we are entering into an era of World War III. I genuinely think we are in at an inflection point in history, and things are really, really serious. I went to the pub last night to pick up my other half, and I looked around, and there was a band playing, and there was all this happiness and joy. And I looked around thinking, I've spent 14 hours a day, like just totally in Ukraine and geopolitics, and like my life is all about, oh my goodness, we're at World War, and then no one here realizes that. I'm sure no one here realizes that. I don't want to project it, to assume too much, but I think everyone's happily getting on with their lives. But I think, should people know how serious things are, as serious as I think things are, or should people live on in ignorant bliss? Because I think things are really serious, and I don't think the public in many of our countries understand how serious this is. But I do think some of the politicians now do. So I think that's why Emmanuel Macron is giving the rhetoric he is. I think the UK realizes, but we're not communicating it. I think certain politicians do definitely understand that we are at a really important point in history.
Yeah, about the World War III, like the First World War was, talked about as the Great War for decades, basically, before anyone kind of started using that terminology. So I'm not sure at what point in history people might be, talking about the wars around in the world and this period as World War III. I think that's a thing a question we can't really answer right now, but that there is a possibility that this period that started 2 years ago will be talked about as World War III is definitely not out of the question. I don't protest that. While I think there are still some things that needs to happen for that to be the case, unfortunately, it doesn't look very positive right now.
Well, like words, labels, phrases, words don't have objective meaning. They have subjective meaning for all of us. And when we agree on terms, we write dictionaries, and dictionaries reflect how we use terms. They don't prescribe. I believe in that they are descriptive pieces of work, and they just describe how we use language. So World War III, this is World War III if we all agree it's World War III. And it's kind of like, there is no like right or wrong answer here. It's just a kind of consensus approach. I mean, a world war is an international conflict that involves most or all of the world's major powers. So does this, I mean, that's a general definition. Does this war involve most or most of the world's major powers? Well, actually, it does involve us. So NATO is fully involved. There are countries that are doing everything to support Ukraine, apart from sending troops. And actually, a lot of us are sending troops under the radar, like special forces, and there are supposedly NATO trainers in Ukraine, apart from there aren't. And so you could argue this is a proxy war. I think it is, but not in a pejorative sense of the term. I think we are effectively all engaged in a war in Ukraine with everything but our frontline troops. And we can talk about how China affects the war. We can talk about North Korea, Iran. We can talk about how Israel and Iran. There are overlapping conflicts which feed into how this conflict plays out. And I think essentially, I would very comfortably term this as a world war at the moment, especially when you consider information war, cyber warfare. Let's have a look at some things: trade, sanctions, conventional warfare, weapons supply, disinformation, electoral interference, artificial intelligence, cyber warfare, etc., etc. So when you take all of these components of what I think modern warfare is, hybrid warfare, I think we're there.
Yeah, I think you make some really good points, and one of the biggest impacts we've had here in Europe has, of course, been this Baltic jammer thing, which is directly interfering with air transport and shipping. Not many people have talked so much about the shipping, but it could be actually a bigger problem because they don't necessarily have the same measures to navigate without GPS, because a lot of shipping has been mainly been navigating out of GPS for a long time now. Of course, they can navigate without it, but it's a big problem in the Baltic right now. Of course, there's also been this deviations for a couple of airliners, and some routes have been cancelled as well, which means that this is actually physically interfering with civil infrastructure.
This is a super important point, right? So cyber warfare like that, and you can talk about lots of different ones, like the pipeline attack in the, I'm going to read you a little bit from a foreign policy article titled "Everything Everywhere All at Once, US Officials Warn of Increased Cyber Threats," and this is a recent one from April this year. So, quote, what is most alarming about this is the focus is not on data theft and intellectual property theft, but rather to burrow deep into our critical infrastructure with the intent of launching destructive or disruptive attacks in the event of a major conflict. Jen Easterly, the director of US Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CSIA, said in an interview, CISA defines critical infrastructure sectors as those whose destruction would have a debilitating effect on the economy, national security, public health and safety, dividing them into 16 categories, including communications, defense, manufacturing, energy, agriculture, water, and transportation. The highest profile attacks on those sectors in recent years against the Colonial Pipeline, meat production giant JBS, government system operator SolarWinds, have been attributed to groups in Russia, but US agencies last year found malware systems in Guam, home to key US military bases, and that they linked to a Chinese hacking group known as Volt Typhoon. Easterly said they found more examples since then, etc., etc. So the point that I would make is that cyber warfare, if it stops, say, the attacks on French hospitals recently, and attacks on pipelines, and as you said, the jamming attacks, if it functionally stops things working and has the same functional outcome as bombing those pieces of infrastructure. In other words, assuming that you can bomb and not kill people. So if you bombed a pipeline and it stopped a pipeline working, or bombed a hospital and it stopped it working as a hospital, we would go, right, that's war. And we'd go to war back and we'd say, right, this is war. We are in war. We are declaring war on you because you've done that. And yet we allow cyber warfare to take place, and it has the same functional, arguably the same functional outcome. And yet we go, So I think it's a really interesting question as to why we treat it differently and why we react differently to it. I mean, I've got some answers to that, but interested to see what you guys think.
Well, I guess the answer from the West and NATO and is that we're scared of escalation, and that's why we don't talk about these topics in the way that you just in the way that you just did. It's all de-escalation that is the main focus of the major powers in the West. Macron has, of course, been more vocal in his support of certain actions in Ukraine, and the UK has been letting up on, or basically acknowledging that they think Ukraine should have the right to strike within Russia with their weapons, and same with Finland, etc. But other than that, de-escalation is still the main focus of all these politicians, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So de-escalation, I think, is one of the main components to certainly to the cyber warfare thing, and to just our decision making in general. I'll get back to cyber warfare in a second, but on the subject of nuclear deterrence, you look at. I know Jake Sullivan gets a lot of hard time for his kind of anti-escalation positioning, but you could understand it, and I'm spitballing here, but you could understand it in terms of evolution. So in evolutionary theory, so evolution by natural selection, you might have an organism that is seeing a bush in the distance, and it moves, it sort of rustles, and you've got two options: either that is the wind or it's a tiger. Right. And if I think it's a wind, so I could be really cautious, right, and go, right, I'm not sure what it is, but I think it could be a tiger. And it's kind of over agency detection. So I detect agency where there isn't agency, and I run away thinking, well, it's a tiger. Now, the two options there is, if it was a wind and I run away, I'm alive. If it's a tiger and I run away, I'm alive. right? So you've got two positive outcomes there. Now, if I'm someone that looks at that bush and goes, I think it's the wind. Yeah, it's probably only the wind. Don't worry about it. And I stay, and it is the wind. I survive. But if it's a tiger, I die. So therefore, you've got a 50-50 outcome there. So natural selection will select the organism that survives. There's no agency to evolution, but the organism that is more cautious will survive longer, right? So we can take that idea and we can extrapolate. We can put that onto, say, Jake Sullivan or any kind of political decision makers. And so imagine you're Jake Sullivan, you're thinking, yeah, right, here's a bush here. So Putin could either like not do anything, like when we gave M777s and HIMARS and Storm Shadows, or he could nuke us. And so what do? Do I kind of run away, which is to, not do anything, or do I stand up to this person? But one of the outcomes by standing up to this person is that we could all die in a nuke. So therefore, like, evolution would naturally select the person who would be more cautious and anti-escalatory. So that's how you can kind of explain it in possibly unnecessarily in psychological terms. So but we can understand why people might be cautious, because do you know what, nuclear warfare is pretty scary. But the problem is, if we continually allow this, then you just allow whoever's got nuclear missiles to do what the hell they like in the world. And there's just creeps and creeps and creeps until, oh dear, Putin appears to own Europe. So, yeah, those are my quick thoughts on that.
Yeah, I would like to add something on this, Jonathan, and I think your analysis is very much important in now, because it's been now nearly 3 years of this war, and this problem of the escalation has been always on the table since at the beginning, when we started to send anti-tank weapons. There was always a subject of, oh, there is the possibility that these things escalate. And you say something that about the natural selection and about the fact that it is likely that the more cautious entity will be always the one that survive. But the problem is that this type of approach doesn't work if you are in a relationship of a prey with a predator, because in that case the prey have to organize in a way that or escape always from the attack of the predator, or if it's always in the range of the predator, you have to find a way to strike back in order to keep itself alive. There are entire systems that are based on the prey and predator concept, and always the prey is going to be completely annihilated if it doesn't strike back, and if not, employ a group strategy, which means trying to use the number in order to combat a more aggressive aggressor or predator, let's say. And I
NATO.
think yeah, exactly. And this has been studied. I sent a few days ago, by the way, a video of AI trained about this particular model, and it is well known that in complex system, when you have this dualism, the prey have to always to try to deter somehow the aggressor. Otherwise, this escalation occur in the way that you don't want, because you will have essentially an increase of the request from the aggressor until the point that the population of the prey is completely replaced by predators. So I think we are arrived to a point that we should understand that what you said at the very beginning of the live is even more clear. We have in Europe, in America, in Europe, in UK, of course, we have some particularly far right, far left groups which are very much on the populism area. So their politics is always anti-governative. It doesn't matter if it's left or right, and this type of government will always be a prey of Putin and regime like Putin, China, for example, in order to destabilize the democracies. And if we don't do anything, we will succumb to their activity, because we have to remember that Adolf Hitler and many other dictators never went with a fight to the power. They were elected. So it's very easy to think that, okay, we are democracy, we will be always democracies. No, because democracies can turn into tyranny, into dictatorship by their own will. So it's very important to try to go clear once for all this misconception about being cautious, because
yes, well, the analogy falls down where, in terms of the bush and an organism, because in that example, you just run away from the potential prey. But of course, in international like geography and geopolitics, a country can't run away. So therefore, you need to go, right, how do we deal with the tiger in the bush? And the tiger, considering we can't run away and we just have to stay here. So that's where you have alliances and you have deterrence. And NATO needs to be a sufficient deterrence to stop Russia doing what it does, but Russia is still doing what it does. It's pushing the envelope and pushing the envelope, and you keep pushing the envelope until the other entities stand up to you to stop you pushing the envelope, or deter you from so doing. And so therefore, do we have a NATO with teeth? Do we have a UN with teeth? Is the UN able to do anything? And what do we do? Because we are as well nuclear nations, some of us, like the UK and France. We can draw red lines to Russia too. So as you say, how do we strike back, politically strike back, and say, actually, we need to take control of this war? Because at the moment, Putin is dictating everything, and he gets to draw the red lines and say, oh, you've gone over the red line, and then either react to that or not. But we should be doing that and say, no, if you do this, we will do this, and take it back, because I think he would just crumble to strength, Putin, personally.
So, going a little bit back to the original question, how do you think, the populations in Europe are going to be in the, what kind of sociological state will they be? Do you think they're going to get into this group mentality? Do you think there's going to be more of a feeling that we need to stick together to make sure that everyone is safe? Because I think if we don't see that happening more, we're gonna have a decline in political support as well, because it's all connected. And then, of course, that might affect Ukrainians too, because in a way they're part of our pack. Even if we didn't let them in officially, they're still a part of our pack. They're fighting as the pack that is closest to the monster in the east, and we're just giving support from the rear, basically.
100%. It's all about unity. It's about European unity, EU unity within the EU. What it's no surprise, and I know I might annoy some viewers here, but it's no surprise that Putin was on the side of the Leave campaign for the Brexit vote in 2016 and amplified that message and got involved in that Brexit election with disinformation or amplifying of certain narratives, because the EU to him is a bigger threat than the US. I know US is the classic Cold War enemy, but actually the EU is on the doorstep of Russia and buys its hydrocarbons and is much more an important factor in Russia's success or lack of success. And so the goal number one for Russia is undermining EU unity. And that is done politically by directly going to politicians and saying, can we'll take you on a nice trip to Moscow, or we'll give you this money, or we'll put this influence on you so that you can vote in a way that aligns with our objectives. And it also involves disinforming populations. So this is how social media is so incredibly important. This is what the Russians do in troll farms, and we are not fighting back. We don't have troll farms. I think I said this to you last interview, is that we seem to have no comeback to the Russian troll farms. We should be generating troll farms not to disinform the Russian population, but to actually properly inform it about who their government really is. So about presenting a positive message of the West. We should employ huge amounts of people to do that, because if we don't, we are just giving the Russians an asymmetrical, an advantage there, and they are going to control the narrative to sow disunity among the population, and then the population vote in. So either they are controlling certain politicians, or they're controlling what populations believe, so that they vote in politicians who are going to act in favor of Russia. And so this is the challenge. And if Russia succeed in doing that, then they starve Ukraine of the arms and the money and the support from allies. And I honestly think the US has fallen victim to this in certain areas. But again, you only need to control certain people. And the EU is really challenged at the moment, and is done a pretty good job of being unified. But there are challenges going forward. Amazingly, I think the UK is in a fairly good position, but I think that's largely due to our not having a shared history with Russia, and always being an enemy of Russia, and also Litvinenko and Skripal assassinations or assassination attempts on UK soil. We've just got bipartisan dislike for Russia, and that allows us, I think, not to be susceptible to Russian disinformation. But anyway.
It's interesting, this topic, and I think that especially the fact that we don't really talk about this and misinformation as a weapon, even though it clearly is. It's a part of PSYOPs, which is a military operation, and
it's part of the World War, I would say.
During the World War II, there were major efforts as well to inseminate mis and disinformation, and especially in the US, there were big campaigns that were fairly successful until the attacks on Pearl Harbor. This question about social media and control, which Elon Musk, of course, has sparked, but basically giving everyone a free pass. And then you have TikTok on the other side that are controlled by the Chinese. And there's a lot of debate about, basically blocking TikTok. I'm personally in favor of it, because I think it's a very, very harmful platform, and it's very likely that it's being used to harm our populations and also our governments. But do you think that there is a way? Because well, Telegram is doing some strange stuff now as well, which is also kind of scary.
Ukrainians
nobody uses Telegram.
Yeah, everyone is scared of what's going to happen with Telegram now, and they've also been doing some campaigns against Signal to take market share from them. So, I mean, the bot farms, I'm not sure if that's the right weapon, but I think controlling what sort of media are allowed to operate completely freely in our territory is not unnatural. And then you can say, it's censorship, etc., but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's censorship. But if you have a medium that is mainly harmful, then is that something that should be allowed just because of free speech?
This is a subject I love talking about, and I get into a bit of hot water with a lot of my viewers, because a lot of people love the idea of free speech, but love it to the complete purist angle lengths, which is, I think, really problematic. So if we just allow free speech without doing anything about it, then we are inviting in nefarious actors to take advantage of us. And I think Twitter's a great example, especially when you've got Elon Musk, who appears to be pro-Russia to a large degree. His best mate, David Sachs, is just spreading disinformation left, right, and center, and Elon Musk amplifies him. Elon Musk's own voice is amplified by the algorithms of Twitter, so on and so forth. But then when you talk about the Russian bots and trolls, so the real humans and also automated people, and then when you start talking about AI and how that can generate content at phenomenal rates, and then you're thinking, we are being attacked. Our heads are being invaded. Our lives are being invaded in a way that we just wouldn't accept in any other kind of context to do with conventional war. But these are state actors trying to manipulate us so that they gain advantage over us. And if we just say, but it's okay because freedom of speech, then we allow the worst of society to be the worst that can be said to be said, and allow people to manipulate us. At some point, we've got to say, right, we need to deal with this, in whatever way, and we can think up lots of ways of doing this, and some of them might be forms of censorship, but we shouldn't be afraid of that if it's in answer to essentially a bellicose attack from a foreign enemy nation.
Because if you want to tackle the real machinery behind the Russian dis and misinformation campaigns, it's going to be very complicated, because there are many big, let's say, accounts on Twitter and other drivers of information that are not necessarily obviously controlled by Russia, but they play a role in the Russian mis and disinformation game. I'm a little bit scared of mentioning, or not scared, but yeah, I'm gonna mention some of them. So there are some accounts, for instance, Nexta, which no one really knows who is controlling right now. And those accounts, they post so much information without giving sources, and often that information is wrong.
I actually use them quite a lot, but you're right, they don't give sources in a responsible way.
It's very irresponsible, and in my opinion, even though I don't know who's actually controlling it and for what objectives they have, they ruin a lot of the information picture for the people that actually want to get information from Twitter, because they get so much, so many views and retweets, etc., by people who don't necessarily go and look for the sources, and often it's not really good information. And even if I'm wrong in my assumptions that there's something iffy about the account, which I believe there is, this sort of social media phenomenons, they contribute to that, exactly what Russia wants, and that's what I'm really scared of. How can we actually combat that? Because that's just one. Visegrad is an example of
I used to use them and don't use them at all anymore.
They are definitely malicious. There's no doubt about that, because they spread really bad information inside, in between positive news about Ukraine and obvious support for Ukraine, NATO, etc. But then suddenly you have some really, really bad bad stuff that really is damaging and hurtful. And they're very popular. And most people don't know this, or don't believe when you say that these are malicious accounts.
But I mean, we need to have. Why I like what Emmanuel Macron's doing at the moment, because I think he's saying the right things, and I think he realizes how serious this all is, and I think he's genuine as well. I don't think this is just individual political positioning. There might be an element of that goes along with that, and he might get some benefit out of it. Although I think it might come as a political cost to him, what he's saying at the moment, arguably. So anyway, like what he did in sitting down for half an hour on national TV to talk to a couple of reporters about the importance of Ukraine and supporting Ukraine was brilliant, because I think every leader in among the allied nations should be doing that, to communicate to the public. There's just not enough decent education of our electorates on what is going on and what the rationale is for our governments to support Ukraine, why it's important geopolitically, strategically, what the cost benefit analysis is, what the opportunity cost of not helping Ukraine would be, what the economic benefits for stimulating your defense industrial military complex, although that's maybe a little bit controversial, but so on and so forth. And then we just need to be communicating this. Biden at the beginning of the war just went on the whole moral thing, which is correct, but I think it took the Biden administration too long to go, these are all the other reasons that it's really beneficial to support Ukraine. And hopefully, at least one of these will appeal to you. There needs to be much more education, but also education about cybersecurity and information security, epistemic security, as it's kind of known in philosophical circles, the epistemology study of knowledge and truth. So we need to be educating our electorates, on our populations, on how to use social media and how to look out for when you are being manipulated and disinformed, in the same way that Finland does a good job of this, starting with their early, young children going upwards. Anyway, rant over.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to introduce a little bit of a new topic, but before I do that, I want to say that we're going to try and do a quick Q&A at the end of the stream. So if you have any questions to anyone on the panel in the chat, please post them and we'll try to go through them towards the end. And
can I add one more point, though, before we go off to a different subject? But carry on.
Yeah, and also if anyone else in the panel want to jump in the conversation, please do so. Andrew, I don't know if you're awake yet, but and how you're doing, but
I'm here.
Okay, good. Yeah, go ahead, and then I'll.
Yeah, so the last thing I want to say, so we talked about cyber warfare and why don't we react? Why don't countries react to when we're attacked? So things like SolarWinds was massive, and SolarWinds has been forgotten by many people, because what happened next day, pretty much just after SolarWinds came about in 2019 into 2020, January the 6th happened, and that completely took out SolarWinds was massive and had been going on for some time, and China had been hacking into American systems and so on and so forth, and we just had the MOD hacked in the UK. 270,000 people's details were accessed by Chinese hackers, and so this is really huge stuff. Why aren't we reacting? Well, we talked already about nuclear deterrence, or sorry, escalation. Not nuclear. So we talked about, we don't want to react to that because it means we're going to have to make this public. And we're going to have to do something about that, which means kind of going to war or having a trade war or something that will, in the end, cost the population. Inflation will happen. They're not going to be happy. We won't get voted in. Plus, we'll be at war. That kind of thing. Okay, so people kind of put up with cyber warfare going on. But the other thing is, and I'd be interested in, I don't know if any of the panel have any knowledge about this. I don't. But the other thing is, well, we might well be doing it just as much. Right, and so while we might complain about SolarWinds, is it the case that the US is actually doing similar to SolarWinds, so that if we go, right, you've done this to us, so we're going to start on you, and then China goes, yeah, and you've done this, and you've done this, and I don't know. I was just looking at so 10 most powerful countries in cyberspace, says this particular article in Secure World. So ranking the 10 most powerful cyber nations in the world: 1, United States; 2, China; 3, the United Kingdom, surprised we're so far up; 4, Russia; 5, Netherlands; 6, France; 7, Germany; 8, Canada; 9, Japan; 10, Australia, and I think Israel is tied in 11th. Now, how it's worked out is surveilling and monitoring domestic groups, strengthening and enhancing national cyber defenses, controlling and manipulating the information environment, foreign intelligence collection for national security, commercial gain or enhancing domestic industry growth, destroying or disabling an adversary's infrastructure and capabilities, and defining international cyber norms and technical standards. So I think Harvard put this together. Harvard Kennedy School has said, US, China, UK, Russia, Netherlands. So if the US is top of that, then I'm sure that's not just about the capabilities the US has, but I'm sure there's some element that they are actually doing cyber warfare as well, but I don't know.
The US Department of Defense talks about that they do have a offensive cyber warfare capability, and they use that sort of as a recruitment tool, actually, to advertise to ambitious young minds that want to work in that field, that, if you come work for the Department of Defense, then you have the opportunity to actually do offensive cyber operations rather than just doing defensive security stuff, preventing enemy hostile actors from penetrating your own assets. So it's something that they do maintain. It's not something that they seem to talk a lot about beyond that. I don't recall any instance in which the U.S. government has disclosed that, yeah, we did this offensive cyber operation against X entity. I don't think that's ever been a thing, but somebody can correct me if I'm wrong if they know the answer to that question.
I know that CFR.org has done an analysis of, since 2004, 2005, 34 countries are suspected of sponsoring cyber operations. China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea sponsored 77% of all suspected operations. But
yeah, it's a Council on Foreign Relations, by the way. To be honest.
thank you.
But the thing I would just add is like I certainly have no like practical experience in this matter, but like the vibe I get from like listening to like U.S. security discourses that obviously the U.S. is fairly active in the cyber world, but that they tend to just like they don't usually use. They're not just constantly attacking things in that way. They're getting into systems and then like watching like. They don't burn things as easily. Whereas like, they're conducting attacks. They're like testing. You have to constantly be testing your opponent's ability to resist attacks. Like in other words, if you go to like the NATO Center for Cyber Operations in Estonia and you ask them like, how often are you guys attacked? It's like, oh yeah, every 5 seconds, right? Like in other words, I'm sure that they're doing basic level stuff like that to penetrate things, but I don't think that they're like disrupting like hospitals or things or power grids in the way that Russia's attempting to do. They're getting into systems and then being quiet, right? Like and waiting. And you know, we've seen things like Stuxnet would be the most high profile thing I think we've ever seen in terms of a cyber operation done by the West. But I don't know if anyone else has any examples.
I was listening to an analysis of the British MOD hacking from China the other day, and they weren't particularly experts on the matter, but they were saying that just China is always hacking. It's just what they do all the time, and it comes as no surprise that that happened, and it wasn't necessarily that they were really intending to do anything with that, or that was, you know, the objective was to take that data and blah blah blah. But they're just always trying things out, and here was another example of them succeeding. It kind of goes in line with what you're saying, which is like, it's every 5 minutes. You know, they're just attacks. They aren't necessarily like they aren't necessarily each individual kind of mission or project to get X, Y, and Z. It's just like try it out, and a bit like the deep battle doctrine of the Russian army, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, and I guess just like maybe before Erlend goes to the next topic, just one thing I would add is about the general topic that you were mentioning. I think like the U.S. and Europe, I guess like UK in particular, I think are pretty good at traditional information operations, right? Like we have Radio Free Europe or Radio Liberty, you know, across the world. And then the BBC World Service has, you know, the Tajik service I use all the time, or Turkish, and all languages you can think of, right? And they're great agencies, right? They're real legitimate news agencies with real journalists doing real journalism. It's good stuff. I highly recommend everyone look at that stuff. But I think the issue is we don't have people like in the trenches, right? Like if there was an ATP geopolitics in Russia, it would either be completely a state operation or it would be immediately co-opted by the state, some branch of the state, right? And then, you know, Russia has these like paid, and China and all these countries have like paid influencers on these different platforms that like, you know, so I think that at that ground level, like on the YouTube comment section, or on the level of like YouTube influence videos or those things, that's where the West has really had a capability gap, right? We're pretty good at like the traditional, you know, Radio Free Europe stuff, but when it comes to that ground level stuff, I think we really lack. And I think you're right that we need some capability. I'm not sure what it looks like exactly, but yeah, that's where we lack, I think.
It looks like us. We're it.
And that's really interesting, Andrew, you say that, because one, I see myself as part of that. Like I genuinely see my job as trying to you know, sow the seeds of truth, you know, in hopefully fertile territory. But also that is really what we are. I have enough comments on my show to say thank you for keeping on, you know, putting out information, accurate information as we see it. And we are in this war. This is why I say we're in World War III, because I genuinely think that all of us here are involved in World War III. We are soldiers, just in different uniforms.
Yep. I mean, that's why Tochnyi was created in a way. It was to, you know, try and help getting out accurate information, and also highlight Ukrainian voices as much as we can. Yeah, I'm gonna try and inseminate this new topic, which is kind of connected in my opinion, and it's a little bit difficult for us to speak about, and I know Daniela has a lot to say about this as well, but there's been a lot, and also Andrew probably. Recent months, there's been kind of a pretty evident decline in Ukrainian morale. I'm not trying to say that Ukrainian morale overall is bad, although you might be inclined to say so if you have certain opinions. But there are some evident problems with recruitment. People are scared about mobilization. If you read Ukrainian chat groups, some people are really scared about being mobilized. Some people are very angry about being mobilized, or that they might be immobilized, etc. And more anger at the government than before, even though the polls really shows very big support towards the Zelensky government. And I know Daniela has been doing some preliminary research on this, but my kind of question is, how can we in the West help Ukraine to fix these issues? Because I think we need to help them, although of course there are things that needs to happen inside Ukraine, moreover than just from external support. I think they really need to do some stuff to fix some of these things. But Daniela, you did some research. Could you maybe quickly, give some accounts of the feedback you got from some of the interviews you did?
Yeah, I started to ask the same question to different Ukrainian friends and the people that I met along the way, because sometimes I do some fundraising, so I have some friends in Ukraine. I have also contact with the Glasgow Ukrainian society. So I asked essentially, what is the feeling about mobilization? I really kept the question open at this moment because I wanted mainly to see what people felt, and also the only things that I asked as information was where they lived, age group, and that's it, and not even political parties or other things. And in general, people are very much convinced that the war can be won. They are that no one told me that they were desperate, but there is a lot of fear and in some cases a sense of injustice. This is something that I heard many times. I heard like 20 people, not that much, but mostly distributed between East and West Ukraine. And many of them told me that people are essentially there are different categories. There are people that are worried about mobilization because they fear for their life, because they fear that without weapon and without training, they would be essentially their life would be lost. And I think this is the biggest chunk of the people who are less enthusiastic of the mobilization. And now there is of course a difference in age group. The younger, most of them, even those that would not be affected by the mobilization, because I think the mobilization will stop until 25 years old, correct me if I'm wrong. So younger, 18, 19, 20 years old, they want to go. They really don't care. They are most of them want to go, but they can't unless they volunteer. And practically many of them are already there since the beginning. So they joined, they stayed, and then they are in the armed forces. Some are retained by their parents, some by other issues. But the other chunk of younger people are essentially afraid of dying, which is a completely understandable thing. And they are fearful about the fact that their life would be lost, would be wasted because disorganization, not proper training. So that's one problem. And then there is also a lot of angry, but I mean, with the more rich part of the population. There are essentially, this is well known, that there are people that were able, especially at the early stage, to corrupt officer and other things to try to avoid their sons or relatives mobilization. So this is something that has been, I know that has been hunted down also by the government, but this is something that transmit across population a sense of injustice. So only the poor or who can pay has to go. So that's something that many continuously repeat. And then there are, of course, funny things like, I mean, funny for the situation, because you interviewed the Western Ukrainian, they say, oh, we already have committed a lot, and the Eastern are not doing enough, and the Eastern say exactly the opposite. I would classify this as a classical Northern-South Scottish with English. That's genuine. It tells you that people are really Ukrainian, and so this would not be the problem, which probably was a problem during 2014, 2015, in that period. In that period, this time the war, of course, is felt more because affect the entire country. And regarding this particular point, I had a couple of people that told me that what is missing at the moment is what was available at the very start of the war, when essentially everyone volunteer for become partisan, essentially. And one of the things that I heard essentially is that during the very first period, when people just took their weapon and sided with the military, there was more possibility to express themselves and also have a role personally inside so they felt more that their destiny was in their own hands. And as soon as the war evolved in a better way, people essentially had the two choice: return to civilian life or join the military. And who joined the military felt that they've been entrapped in a system where they were just numbers. They were not motivated, and essentially they felt more used rather than being a resource. And of course, this is also, I think, related to the Soviet era administration of the army, which is changing. But these have essentially affected a little bit the morale of many that volunteer at the beginning. So this is just to give you a very rough overview. So there are also other not smaller, but significant issues regarding propaganda. There is a lot of Russian propaganda, a lot in the west of Ukraine. A lot of lies are spread. Most of the people do not believe, but especially the older tends to believe to this, and in any case spread doubt, which is the worst thing that you can have in a country at war. So on the good side, there is most of the local government now started to slowly reduce the amount of budget dedicated to infrastructure, which was a very big problem at the beginning. So now local government are more actively funding units, and so situation should change in positive. But yes, this is more or less an overview of what I heard so far. I will continue to ask for more information in order to write a better picture of the situation. But people are really and a very important thing, they really admire, most of the people admire the West, even for after our delays and after our issues. They are very grateful. I never heard anyone complaining. And everyone who I asked this question about the possibility of having people training, so Western trainer in Ukraine, they were really happy. They would say that if there would be like some more trainer from the West, probably more people would join because they would feel something different, so a change into the situation.
I'm interested to see what Andrew thinks about mobilization. I've not heard him cast his opinion on that before.
Oh boy. Well, I just I'm not a big fan of Zelensky. I think he's really dropped the ball in the way he's handled this whole situation. Like we're kind of more focusing on like a bigger picture. So I want to try to stick to the bigger picture, because I think there was a period of time when the war first started where you could pass a lot of things that would otherwise be very unpopular. Things involving limiting freedom of movements, freedoms of communication, setting up mobilization guidelines, doing all of those sorts of things that are now extremely difficult to do because, the moment passed. And they had that opportunity and they didn't do it. And instead, they used that opportunity to pass a bunch of laws that are now really seriously backfiring and hindering the entire military and just society in general, with their payouts to the deceased benefits, etc., are like way too high, etc. So those sorts of problems, really, they used the opportunity to pass, where everybody in the country was unified. They all had one thing in mind. They all wanted to work together as much as possible. And instead of using that opportunity to create these long-term systems that you needed to actually supply and win the war, they used that political cash or cachet to pass these stupid bills that were just populist nonsense. And this, I put that entirely on Zelensky, and it's really disappointing. Most of the Ukrainians that I know were freaking out when it happened, and I kind of wasn't paying attention to it then. But it's borne out how much of a disaster those policies have been.
But I'm not trying to defend Zelensky, but the way I understand it, Simon Schuster's book on Zelensky, I've not read it, but I listened to an interview of him, and he was saying they genuinely thought, after the kind of early sort of successes in the war, they genuinely thought they were going to win the war in a fairly quick time scale, and therefore that would explain why they weren't thinking and you can say that that's just really poor contingency planning, but I think there was a sense that they wouldn't need to do all that because they were going to prevail more quickly than evidently they have.
You know what I think of when I hear people say that? It's like those, how there's like these young people who think that they're going to die when they're like 30. So they just spend all of their money and go horrifically in debt, and they don't have any savings, and they don't get any retirement, and then they end up, they're like 35 or 40 or whatever, and they're like $50,000 in debt with no retirement, and they're like, well, now what? That's how this is. This is like, yeah. I don't care if you think you're doing well, you should be preparing anyway.
Yeah, that's a kind of the Avdiivka fortifications argument as well.
Yeah. That's we.
It's all the trigger points for you. It's like, what are the Petro triggers?
There's like the Avdiivka thing is just brutal, because all the commanders knew they needed defenses. They all submitted plans, and all the plans were rejected. So
yeah. I think it comes down to money, people, and policy. So, like, if Ukraine had all the money you could possibly throw at them, that would solve all the issues they have with, not getting paid through on time, not paying for X, Y, and Z, and accommodation and all that. Yeah, let's put corruption aside, and all throwing money at Ukraine would be all the weapons. So if they had all the weapons, all the money, then you would solve all the issues like, oh, I'm worried about whether we're going to have enough, enough guns and ammunition when I join whatever unit. You solve all that. Then your policy, you had the right policies in place, which kind of Andrew was talking about, policies going on there, and then people. And then if you sort those first two out, then you will get certainly more people volunteering. You are always going to get draft evaders. But if everything is as good as it possibly can be in terms of money and policy, then you will get the people. So Yeah, I mean, it sounds easy, doesn't it? But then trying to run a country in the middle of a war is insanely difficult.
Yeah, well, I think like Erlend's original question, right, was like, what can Europe do to help Ukraine through this situation? And I think you like nailed it right there, right? Which is we can't control the people and we can't control the policy. Or when I say we, you know, I guess I'm including myself in Europe, but Europe can help with money, right? I mean, that's one thing they can do. And, you know, this week we did hear some kind of good news, which is that the interest from the seized Russian assets will be, or frozen, I should say, Russian assets will be given to Ukraine. But I think Ukraine's looking for more of like a $300 billion solution to this problem rather than a $1.5 billion solution, right? So I think that's maybe the kind of answer to Erlend's question. How can Europe help? You know, more financial support. That's pretty much the bottom line. Does it change any of what Andrew was saying? No, like Ukraine still needs to sort out these policy and people issues for sure. But yeah, I think that's kind of where Europe can help. Yeah.
It's interesting. I'm speaking to Zhenya, who's a Ukrainian I know, who runs a charity. It's who I went around the kind of near the front lines with, to him, an American guy. And Zhenya's got 20 volunteers working for him, and he reckons with the new mobilization, 16 out of those 20 could well be mobilized. So there is this idea that there is a big impending mobilization. Just I don't know what the new mobilization rules are, but it looks like finally they are going to be mobilizing a large amount of people, and that will obviously have if that many people are being mobilized. I mean, this is why I presume Zelensky didn't do it, which is one, popularity, and two, the massive effect it's going to have on the economy. And that this is the dilemma. And I do understand that it is not such an easy decision as getting, you know, all these people and shoving them into the front lines, because you're taking them out of private jobs who are paying taxes to the government, and then you're putting them all into being paid by the government. And so that's just a hugely asymmetrical issue going on there. And then your economy tanks, and then you can even worse afford all the equipment and the payment of these people, and etc., etc. So it must be just a nightmare.
Yeah, and
Yeah, I mean,
if
go ahead, Daniel.
Oh, sorry, it's Joseph. I just wanted to say that if you think that now Ukrainian industry, especially the defense one, is again on steam. So if you start to remove brain from there, what happened next? Because it's true that an objection that everyone can do, and Andrew said many times, if you don't do this, there will be no Ukrainian government to pay the taxes, because there will be no Ukraine. So this is the biggest issue. But at the same time, you are right, because there is an economical point of view, because Ukraine is not completely funded by foreign government. Then say, okay, if we don't have budget, someone will cover at 100%, even more. So until this situation is not there, I don't think anyone can expect a complete mobilization of every single working able man or woman, because that would lead to other issues that could backfire if the war drags a little bit more.
The more Ukraine mobilized, the better the front lines would be, but the more money they'll need from the West. So the question is, you know, what can Europe do? Well, actually, if Ukraine mobilizes, we are just going to have to bankroll Ukraine an absolute ton more than we are at the moment.
Not only that, I mean, we spoke many times with Erlend as well, and Erlend can confirm this. We will need to send anyway a serious mission of trainer, because there is not enough experienced people that can stay away from the front line in order to train, especially if you are mobilizing nearly 500,000. How many people they will aim to mobilize? So
yeah,
I mean, the thing is that the longer you wait to mobilize, the more people you have to mobilize. So if they had mobilized in the beginning, they wouldn't need as many people now. And also, the people that they would be mobilizing now, the older people, instead of being trapped in this war for indefinite periods, they would be able to go back home and go back into the economy too. So they're waiting this long is really doing catastrophic damage to their economy.
Yeah. At this point, I think they wait. So there was a point where they could have mobilized more people, trained them, and made sure rotations were possible, like Andrew suggested. That time period, like that, kind of ran out in the autumn, I think, because now they're in this situation where they have to mobilize a complete, like a completely regeneration. That doesn't mean that everyone is going to be able to go home, but not at all. A lot of them will have to stay, but some people will need replacement because they're just exhausted and not combat effective anymore. And they're in this situation where only a few military units are able at all to train fully from a mobilized civilian, and that's a really big black hole for Ukraine right now.
Right now, Ukraine needs like 100,000 guys just to fill in the current brigades to back the normal strength. And then they're probably going to need another 200,000 in addition to that to build new brigades, and probably another 100,000 in addition to that to start taking people out of the front that shouldn't be there anymore.
Do you think this? I mean, there's a question from Tim Vermorgan in the chat there saying, and rightly so, do you think this is why Macron and Landsbergis and others have been talking more about a coalition of trainers, perhaps to go and help inside Ukraine? Do you think this is in light of a larger scale? You know, is this a coincidence they're saying that now, or is this in light of a mobilization?
I personally, I suspect that things might be planned out right now, because Ukraine really can't train these people. The training centers are already completely filled up, and a lot of the instructors have been forced to be sent to the front because they couldn't afford having them at the training centers anymore. If you're going to mobilize 500,000 people in 1 year, you will have to pump out almost 50,000 people every month. Ukraine can't train that many people. In the West, we can train maybe 5,000 people. If Germany starts a larger scale training mission now, France ramps up theirs in addition to the one in the UK and those that are in other countries like Norway and some Eastern European countries. But we can maybe pump out 5,000. Yes, we can probably put that number up a lot if we get help from the US, etc. in Europe. But the logistics of sending, 20, 30, 40,000 Ukrainians to European training centers, it's just not possible. They will need translators, they need officers from their own military and military police to follow them. It's impossible.
This is a really good opportunity for Ukraine, though. So I was talking about this in a video the other day, that if you do get you start saying, right, we're going to have NATO or allied trainers on Ukrainian soil, and if Russia don't send the nukes up in response to that, if that's like a fake red line, which I'm sure it would be, then you can start having mission creep, which is now we've got NATO troops there, or we've got Western trainers, we're going to have to defend them with air defense, and now we're going to have maintenance people in, and now you don't have to announce all this, but you then start getting to a situation where it's like boiling a lobster in a pot, where actually Russia are like, oh, we didn't react to that, now they go, we can't really react to that tiny bit of incremental increase, and actually a year later this mobilization could cause like Western troops to be doing an awful lot more inside Ukraine than ever we had thought.
Yeah, and this is something that Russia probably fear most of that, rather than the possibility of having 10,000, 20,000 NATO troop in Western Ukraine, because you put them in front of a terrible dilemma: what to do, because you are going to strike target next to NATO troop, and what happen if you kill NATO troop? You declare war on NATO. What would be the next? And I think the point that Macron made clear is that we don't want to make our enemies, because these are our enemies, understanding what would be our next reaction. We are not going to. We should avoid at all costs red lines. No more red lines. We will decide whatever is just when these happen. We cannot say, oh, well, if you kill just 3, maybe we are not going to do anything. But if you will kill 5, then we may shoot something down. We should just go and do whatever is needed without giving to Putin and his allies what would be the response. Because this would would incrementally increase the presence of Western troops in Western Ukraine, helping also, as I said, to boost the mobilization and improve the quality of the training that now is not possible to provide because of constraint of manpower. And another point is very crucial: the logistic. Because mobilizing all these people will need a lot of logistic work behind. And having NATO starting to bring staff directly to support the mission, it may help also in transferring weapon and other instrumentation, which could be accessory to the mobilization success. So this is a very big dilemma for Putin at the moment, and I hope that these things will go on, because I think it's the best chance for the West and Ukraine to have a good army for 2025, when it's predicted that Russia may have lost most of its Soviet era weapon systems, and so they will be more vulnerable.
Yeah, and I think correct me if I'm wrong, but is Emmanuel Macron up for re-election in 2027? And if that's the case, that's a really good thing, because there's so many people. The US is up in 2024. All this is contingent upon continued support and unity among the allies, right? So we don't know what's going to happen in November 2024, or at least it's somewhat up in the air. And with regard to these European elections, but there needs to be some consistency for Ukraine, because it's such a tangled web, and all the ducks need to be in a row really for Ukraine to prevail. And it just becomes so much more difficult if even one of those ducks is pissed off over there. So it's just, yeah, so much depends. You need the money, you need the mobilization, you need the policy, you need the European unity, you need the right political makeup in Congress, et cetera, et cetera. It's just so much needs to be right.
And I kind of wanted to arrive to this point where, yes, what do we need? We need the money. Yes, we need the weapons. And then we also need to actually be willing to do some different things that people didn't really think was possible, because it's escalation, and then you'll have the Germans, Germinate Ukraine, probably going to shout and scream at everyone when these plans, I think, which are being made, and I just have this feeling, because it has to happen, that there will be a large-scale training mission in Western Ukraine, and I think that, and I hope that having Europeans on the ground, and also that implies that they will have to defend themselves from missile attacks, etc. I think, and I hope that Ukrainians will see that they are a larger part, or a bigger part of the pack, as you said earlier, and more part of this European family if we do that. I think we absolutely have to do it, unless we want to see Ukraine lose more territory, like substantially more, and also have a lot higher casualties, because untrained soldiers will lead to a lot higher casualties, and also not only higher casualty rates, but the fatality rates among casualties will be a lot higher if you have a bunch of untrained or poorly trained mobilized soldiers that are sent to the front lines, because they won't be able to save themselves, basically.
We need to start pushing that envelope. Like, who was it? Was it Erlend that said we need to just do things a bit differently, which is what we'd expect. So the UK and Finland and other nations have said, yeah, we've got no problem with our weapons being used on Russian territory. We just need a single Storm Shadow to hit an oil refinery in Volgograd or somewhere, and then that gives everyone. And if Russia do nothing mental to that, then that gives everyone permission to pile in. So we just need to push the envelope in one place with maybe, and this is where I think the Baltic nations are really useful because they can maybe do things that aren't quite so escalatory. So the UK, when it did something, so if there's a Finnish weapon that could be used to just take out Volgograd refinery, then, you know, that's not as bad as, say, an American weapon or a British weapon. If you know, an Estonian weapon could be used to slightly push the envelope, or Lithuanian troops could be inside Ukraine, then it's using these smaller nations to push the envelope that allow the bigger nations to go, oh yeah, oh, and now we've got some, oh yeah, now we're using now Storm Shadow's been used, so on and so forth. I just think there's a lot of psychology that can be involved in what next moves might be.
And just to add something regarding UK and Russia relationship, we should also remember that I lose the count of the times that we have been traded of nuclear destruction, tsunami, apart from cyber attack, spies, continuous incursion in the northern part of the northern airspace, political interferences, lobbying, assassination with the use of chemical weapon, which has been very, very much appreciated here in UK, and interference with Scottish and Brexit referendum. So I think UK is quite pissed off with Russia, and this is also the reason why UK has been always that vocal, because Netherlands is very similar, because the MH17 still in vivid memory. So, and this is the reason why the F-16 has been particularly felt by them. And so I think we should really don't care too much about what Russia could do, because we know what they can do. They can destroy completely a country and then carry on as nothing happened. So we know that they are dangerous, and for this reason we should deal with them with the serious action.
So I pulled up this question because it's kind of relevant to everything we're talking about. So from John Larkin, if F-16s are proven to be not a game changer, which they will not be, and Europe and America do not man up financially, will Ukraine have to go to the table, or Balkan states say sod this? So I guess it basically is asking if we're not stepping up and the F-16s doesn't really have a big impact, if Ukraine is going to have to basically, you know, say, hey, we're open to negotiations to stop the war and a ceasefire. And to the F-16s, it's quite so F-16s alone, or no weapon alone, is going to be a complete game changer in this war. But the F-16s, if given the right weapons, will definitely have a large impact. Depends not just the weapons, also the sustainability on the logistics behind the F-16s. If that is all sorted out so that they can have many flying hours and use them, and not just, you know, have them on the ground for looking cool, then they will definitely be a very important asset. But it won't make a big significant change if it's not employed with certain munitions that they need to receive, and also in tandem with other weapon systems that they need, and you know, also in tandem with a stronger army when it comes to manpower. If they don't fix these issues, the F-16s won't have, you know, it won't matter. But I don't think I'm quite confident that Ukraine will actually end up winning this war. It's just incredibly frustrating to see these missteps being done, not just by the Ukrainians. I mean, we have done, you know, so many mistakes that have caused numerous delays and really bad employment of strategy that has caused so many deaths and so much destruction in Ukraine. And now we see, you know, the results of obviously internal decisions that have caused some really big problems that they need to solve in Ukraine.
F-16s are an interesting one because it's been this incredibly frustrating time where they've been announced, and then there's this whole period before they get, you know, sent to the front lines. But actually that's probably quite good, because imagine like F-16s with a load of really cool weapons was suddenly like given, here's a bunch and you can use them right away. Russia would be like, oh no, right, that's proper escalatory. Whereas actually now that Russia know that they're going to be given, they know they're on the way, they can't go, oh, you've given F-16s now, when they finally turn up, and say, well, in that case, we're going to do X or Y, because they've had all that time to prepare for that. And so yeah, should we tool them up with the biggest weapons we possibly can? I mean, that would be great, because I think they can make, it depends how many they have and how they use and all those things you've already talked about. But in principle, F-16s can be really, really useful. And yeah, but it's another example. It will be hopefully another example where we've pushed the envelope, and Russia, because they haven't reacted so far to them in a meaningful way, it's a case of pushing that envelope further and further. And I think we should just tool them up with as much as we can. I mean, I don't, Colby, do you know what is likely to be on these bad boys?
Well, I wrote a whole article about what they should be equipped with. I won't say too much about what they will, because I don't know for certain, although I have heard things, which I'm not going to repeat right now. It's not confirmed, but I've heard rumors of what we might see. So I would just tell people that they can go read my article for the Insider, which addressed this question, and people can imagine what they might come with. So I'm slightly optimistic, but there's still obviously a very significant degree of hesitance around providing the weapons that they really need, which is more long-range cruise missiles. We've seen not a whole lot of positive indication out of the Biden administration on this question. Obviously, Chancellor Scholz is still 100% against giving Taurus. So the Ukrainians are really still just relying on the United Kingdom and France, who still can't even decisively say, yes, we're going to order new missiles. So there's a lot of shortcomings to go around the table in that regard. And this is one of those key capabilities. Ukraine will not win this war unless they have a sustainable supply of air-launched cruise missiles.
I agree.
So we're still
Can they make their own
there? Well, can they make their own? Ukraine has domestic missile designs. It would be easier for them if we were giving them some technical assistance in this regard, and there's been no clear indication that has happened either. And there seems to be a prioritization of sorts on making the long-range drones instead of investing more resources into those domestic missile programs, because it's easier just to do the drones, even though they're actually less cost-effective in the grand scheme of things.
Oh, I wonder whether, well, yeah, I was going to say, would cruise missiles be more escalatory? And I guess it would. The feeling of cruise missiles going deep into Russia, as a Russian psyche would find that more difficult to cope with than slow flying drones. But yeah, I think they absolutely, Ukraine, my opinion, has just been, for 6 months at least, Ukraine need to sit back and hammer the Russians with as much as they can in terms of long distance munitions, like cruise missiles, HIMARS, ATACMS, other HIMARS, and guided multiple launch rocket missiles, artillery, mines, all that. Just sit back so they don't attrit their own forces, and just let the Russians commit military harikiri, by which they're doing a pretty good job of at the moment. So yeah. That's my opinion.
Well, I think there's kind of unison feeling and a strong sentiment that there is no way that the Ukrainian army will be able to do any offensive maneuvers this year. I know that people might take that as dooming, but it's just realism. There's absolutely no way that Ukraine can launch an offensive, a successful offensive operation. It would be suicide. But the defensive maneuvers that they're doing right now, it actually is really difficult to, and that will be the main focus for the army for the rest of the year, in my opinion, and probably until this time next year. And then deep strikes will be the main focus on any offensive operations. I agree.
I don't understand why the UK didn't just say 2 years ago, everyone else do everything else, we're just going to provide Storm Shadow missiles, and we're just going to ramp up production, and that we're going to specialize. That's what we're going to do. Cruise missiles, you guys can produce MRAPs or whatever else the UK has also provided, and this and that, and Challenger 2s and blah blah blah. We won't really focus on that. It's just cruise missiles, cruise missiles, cruise missiles. That's my opinion. Should have spent an absolute ton on distance munitions.
I don't really think that would make much of a difference, because when you look at the countries who are providing cruise missiles to Ukraine, I don't think there's any replacements for ATACMS, so the US would have to provide them anyways. And besides that, there's only France who's delivering cruise missiles to Ukraine. And so if Great Britain would only focus on providing and producing Storm Shadows for Ukraine, and everyone else is just focusing on MRAPs and tanks and whatever, it wouldn't really make a difference, because they are not providing any cruise missiles at all to Ukraine, which they could spare then. You know what I mean?
I didn't quite understand that. I just think my idea is that however many cruise missiles we provided, we should have done twice as many and some, and just have they should just be firing those things as much as they physically can. Obviously, they don't have enough airframes that can fire those particular missiles, but which is another challenge. But hopefully, with F-16s coming around, I just hope they've got enough cruise missiles, but they clearly don't, in my opinion.
No, absolutely. I agree with you. I just mean I did understand your point as Germany, Poland, whatever, should focus on building tanks and infantry fighting vehicles and MRAPs, and not on cruise missiles. But we're not doing that at all anyways. So, you know,
So it's more about the UK. So rather than spend like $2.5 billion this year, pounds this year on a whole range of stuff, just say, right, we're going to spend £2.5 billion on cruise missiles alone, and then you guys can pick up all the other stuff that we would otherwise be given. But
you know, John, there is an issue with that, because UK has decided to provide assistance on a series of like crucial areas, like drone production, short air defense systems. So I think that is particularly evident that UK is providing armored vehicle, but only from its own stock. Essentially, we gave them all our AS-90. Now we are giving. I don't know if we will ever give them the Warrior, which would be a good idea, I think.
But we're giving the rest of our scimitars, I think.
Yeah, which are of course good vehicle for the scope, but there are other countries that can provide much better vehicle, like CV90s and etc. So I think what UK is doing is correct, and also don't forget that. At the moment, unless Rheinmetall finished to open the other two factory in Europe, one of the largest ammunition factory in Europe is in UK from BAE. So it's very important for them to pump money in this industry, because it's very important to keep the production as high as possible, because we need for us, but also Ukraine need most. So without those investment, nearly $1 billion, would not be possible at the moment to have this production level, which is still low. We need to improve that, but it's going. And regarding the use of Storm Shadow, we have to remember that these are precision strike munition with a particular scope. So these are used to strike in deep enemy territory, even if the enemy still have a radar running and air defense on. So you're not going to see like 20 of these fired on all together. You always see, depending on the airframe, but you will always see a few plus decoy used on very high value target, like, I don't know, a submarine or other, like Crimea has been bombarded most of the summer in August. So I think what Ukraine is trying to do is trying to use this type of weapon on precise type of target. Thinks about the fact that as soon as they had ATACMS, they used on an airport using bomblets. because they were able to completely destroy an entire fleet of aircraft and damage many others. So they are trying to take the best from what they have. So I don't think striking all the front line with Storm Shadow would change much. Also because in terms of ammo depot, after the advent of HIMARS, they start to become smarter and try to
This is
have
true.
smaller ammo depot all over the place. And an ammo depot that small and a Storm Shadow is not worth it. So I think this is also another reason why they are not using like continuously, at least to the public knowledge.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose part of it does depend whether they're going to get JASMs from the Americans and whatnot. But yeah, it's frustrating that there seems to be only one sort. Well, okay, Italy, France, UK, but one kind of cruise missile, and I just always want them to have more of everything.
Yeah, I mean, we have been, I think, driven to the idea that we should strike with 1,000 cruise and missile by looking at the Americans, but look at the US, UK strikes in the Gulf during the first Gulf War. How many cruise missile has been used? I mean, is a huge amount, but also a huge amount of infrastructure behind, and Ukraine is not able to manage that at this point. I mean, unless NATO step in, there is no way that they can handle that. And this is also another reason why they don't have all of these ammunition, because they don't even have the airframe, which is bad. We should provide them more. I agree, but
Legend has it, if we all on the internet bother Maurice enough, that Schultz will give Taurus to Ukraine. I just wanted to ask Colby, speaking of countries that are not going to provide cruise missiles but will provide MRAPs, I believe you interviewed the CEO of Rochelle recently. I just wanted to ask if you wanted to tell the audience anything about that, or if there's anything pertinent that you might want
to. Well, thank you for mentioning that. I don't know where to start because he had an awful lot to say, so I encourage people to read his comments in full, because he was very gracious with his time and providing quite detailed answers to my questions. So I really encourage people to read what he did say, because there's a lot of very relevant information in there. But I'll highlight that they have plans to start localized production of some components in Ukraine, which is very exciting. We always like to see that. They already have a number of maintenance facilities in Ukraine to repair the vehicles, and
they make MRAPs, Colby, or armored vehicles, or what?
So they have their flagship product is called the Senator, which is a armored vehicle that initially sort of came out in an armored personnel carrier configuration, but they've since had a few different successive variants, and one of those is an MRAP. So that's the main variant that they're looking to provide to Ukraine, because obviously it has higher levels of protection. And obviously mines are a big thing in Ukraine right now, and UXO in general. So having an MRAP configuration is quite important. So they're delivering lots of those to Ukraine. There's also a new medical evacuation vehicle that they have developed, and they are hoping to get some donors to procure those for Ukraine. So that's another thing that I would flag, is that obviously medical evacuation vehicles is something that we hear about being very high in need. So Rochelle has such a vehicle available, and hopefully some countries come up with some money to start buying those for Ukraine. So there's that, and there's also they plan on expanding into Germany as well, and they're in conversations with the German government as well about their ability to provide vehicles to Ukraine. And I know Germany to Ukraine has talked about some of the challenges that have there have been with the German government's own commitment to deliver some MRAPs to Ukraine, and the contractor that they had selected was having some challenges meeting their contract and their delivery timeline. So Rochelle has said that we're here as an option if you're interested in our product, and they're looking to expand and establish some production facilities in Germany anyway. So a ton of different exciting things happening with them, and I wrote a thread. It's on my feed, and you can find links, a link to the article there. I'll throw it in chat as well, maybe.
Is that the thread from May the 9th? It looks like. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Just looking at that. I had missed this one. And they're a great company because either he's Ukrainian of Ukrainian descent, isn't he, or his wife, and they employ a load of Ukrainian sort of refugees and whatnot over in Canada from the diaspora community or refugees, and so they've got that connection to the war over and above any other given sort of military concern.
Yes, there's over 200 Ukrainian refugees that are working for him, and he mentioned that a number of them are eager to return home to Ukraine and help establish these new production facilities in Ukraine. So that's in the future, in the near future.
And these are essentially people that you would like not to mobilize because their work is so important.
I presume the defense military industrial complex is ring fenced workers in that again, so that they aren't mobilized. I presume, but
even in Russia.
Also well paid. I saw some advertisement on Telegram about a new job position as riveters.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to derail the conversation, but I definitely wanted to bring attention to Colby's interview with the CEO of Rochelle because, I thought it was quite an interesting exchange that he had. Erlend, did you want to have more questions from chat, or do you have another topic you wanted to hit?
No, not really. I just, well, by the way, this is the article at Defense Archives. So brought that up. Well, there was a question about. Yeah, you're welcome. By the way, great article, Colby, or great interview. So there was a question about like the seizure of Russian assets in Europe, and if it's likely. I think what did he say? How close are we to finally using the seized Russian assets? That was from Celix a while ago. So, as far as I understand, the European Union has passed legislation to take basically the dividends and the interests from those assets. But as far as actually taking the assets, selling them off, and giving the money to Ukraine, I have very strong doubt that will ever happen from the European Union. Maybe the US might be able to do something, but if there is money in a bank account that Russia has, maybe. But I don't think we're going to see the seized Russian assets being sold off for financing Ukraine.
Bill Browder was just interviewed on Times Radio, and he was saying that this is the sort of thing that seems to happen with these situations with regard to policy. It's a bit like the floodgates opening. So once a little bit happens, then people get a little bit more confident, and then so on and so forth, and more things can happen down the road. So the fact that there's broad agreement on around $3 billion worth of the profits from frozen assets to be given to Ukraine is the start, but he sees it as not being the end, and that he's confident that there will be more to come from there, whether it be the full amount, whether it be from stuff from the US. I know the US doesn't have an awful lot, but it's all Euroclear in Belgium for like most of that. But he seems to be rather positive about the future there. But yeah, I don't know. I think there are so many legal potholes that one can fall into that that the EU won't want Russia to come back and bite them on the arse with.
Yeah, I just think that there are too many players involved, and you have to have an unanimous vote in the EU probably, and probably there will also be some court cases involved in this whole affair. I just see too many hurdles, and I don't think European politicians are willing to take that step, mostly because they would be scared of foreign investors about the effects that might have on on European banks.
Yeah. But what Bill Browder was saying actually is that the more it really requires unity. So it was to do with foreign currency reserves and the fact that if the US did that on their own, then people will start thinking, well, the dollar's a bit dodgy, or I don't really understand the details here, but there would be all other alternatives, routes that people would go down for foreign currency reserves, because you wouldn't want to invest in this because you might get frozen or whatever. So, but if and I'm really badly explaining this, but what Bill Browder was saying, that if we all do this together, then there's no alternative other than, say, the yuan or rupee or something. That, you know, if we stay strong together, then actually you can achieve much more with regard to how the usage of these frozen assets can turn out. But I don't know the details on. It's a really bad explanation.
Well, hopefully it happens. I just don't really have that much faith in it. And the current state is that there's no decision made on the actual assets, as far as I know.
Can I ask?
Yeah, go ahead.
How they are divided, these assets? So how much, for example, is in Europe? How much in US? How much in UK?
I think the US has only got 5 billion. I think 210 billion in Euroclear, is it? And is it 320 billion in total? And there's quite a bit in Japan. But yeah, most of it, I think 210 billion is in Euroclear in Belgium. I think
that's roughly accurate. Yeah, like Belgium is the real question here. The US has, I think, 8 billion, but yeah, the numbers you said were roughly accurate.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I just want to point out that although we are not using the assets itself, the frozen assets itself, alone using the profits each year from these frozen assets is a great benefit for Ukraine. Because when you think about it, it's like 90%, 3 billion, something like that. That's a huge chunk of money. Like when all of that money would go to military aid to Ukraine. Jonathan, how much is is Great Britain giving Ukraine a military aid this year? 3.5 billion.
Yeah, so I mean, that is I've often thought about this, that actually that 3 billion, 90% that 3 billion, it's not the 210 billion that they wanted. You know, the justice minister from Ukraine was sounding off this week saying, yeah, it's great, it's good, but we want 210 billion. And of course he's going to say that because that would sort them out for a couple of years worth of existing. You know, that would just be insanely good. So that's what they're going to be wanting. But 3 billion on military aid is certainly going to help.
Yeah, I believe that's please correct me if that's wrong, but that's one of the biggest contributions to Ukraine for one of I mean, it's not from a single country, but as a single source. In my opinion, that's nearly what Great Britain is doing. That's more what France is doing. That's you have to imagine that that's a huge chunk of money which comes on top of the military aid now each year than what was expected to be delivered to Ukraine.
And it would be in cash, wouldn't it? And the other question I have is that if they've agreed to do this, then they've already amassed 2 years worth. Right, so they're talking about $3 billion a year, but what's happened to the $6 billion from the last 2 years? And so my thoughts are that if like, no one seems to have talked about that, but that could be like $9 billion this year.
My general understanding is that Euroclear is engaged in lawsuits with various Russians for this money, and they're saying that money is tied up in that, and until that's all resolved, they don't want it. They're in legal disputes about that existing money, and it's being
so
used
the last 2 years, but
correct,
it's fine going on. So they're keeping that back as kind of collateral.
Yes, correct.
Cool.
And people are saying, but why? Because your legal expenses are like a couple $1 million, and this is like $9 billion, and they're like, well, you know, there might be more. I think I don't fully get it, but that was kind of that was Euroclear's claim about what is happening with that money right now.
Yeah.
And I just want
I'm
to
not
point
an economist. That's my understanding. Sorry, go ahead, Maurice.
Yeah, no worries. I just want to point out, although a lot of people, and of course, like everyone clearly understands it, that to use the assets itself would provide a lot more aid to Ukraine, because it's like a couple of hundred of billions, right? But I think
But it wouldn't be liquid.
Yeah. What people shouldn't forget is that when we are just using the profits from the frozen assets, we can keep the assets itself frozen until Russia. In the case the war has to be frozen, Ukraine loses territory on a permanent basis, whatever, right? People don't want to imagine it, but it can happen. It's a war, right? Nobody knows what will happen in the future. And in the case Russia is not losing this war and is not repaying Ukraine for the damage it has done, how do you want to rebuild Ukraine without using these frozen assets? When you spend them prior to that, we're talking about damage with billions, hundreds of billions of euros. Like, you have to use these assets when Russia is not paying Ukraine, and in some cases you can't force Russia to pay Ukraine all the damages they've done. So I think it's a smart move. It's a backup strategy to keep that assets and just to use the profits of the frozen assets itself. Just want to point that out from my perspective.
Yeah,
I agree.
Yeah, agreed.
I personally think it's fundamentally immoral to use the assets to fund the war. I mean, using the profits is one thing, but I think using the assets itself to fund the war is immoral. And I don't think we should, like, even if we get past the legal barrier, that is a total failure on our part if we ever have to get to that point. That means that we have really screwed up as the West. Like, that means Europe and America has completely failed, and we need to not let that happen.
Do you mean that, like, so when you say that that's morally you can't do that or whatever, it's bad, is that because we're going to a point past where we should have done stuff ourselves, or are you saying that because using frozen Russian assets is in itself bad?
No, those assets should go to rebuilding the cities.
Yeah.
And if we don't use it to rebuild the cities, that means that we have failed morally.
Right, I see.
Yeah, I totally agree about that. I think it's a problem as well to use them, because then what is going to be left to get from Russia as war reparation, right? It's going to be impossible to retrieve those for the next decades. I think the last estimate I saw, the estimated destruction that Russia has caused in Ukraine is, closing up on $1,000 billion or something crazy. How do we get that money from Russia? It's not going to be, it's not realistic.
Yeah, I agree with you guys, like, sort of in principle. I sort of could make maybe a counter argument that, like, either Ukraine gets the money now or later to rebuild, right? And it's like either way, but
two sides of a square.
Yeah, that aside, I think I guess I'll put it this way, just in terms of amounts, right? I think that there's a big difference between $200 billion and $1.5 billion. And I think that that's maybe the issue that's facing Ukraine right now, right? They have a $200 billion problem and they're being given $1.5 billion. And I mean, regardless of like where that money comes from, I think that's maybe something, I don't know, like Europe, obviously we know this, but like Europe needs to step up, and so does the US, or foreign partners need to step up and like increase the amount of aid going to Ukraine, because I don't know, that's the sort of magnitude of problem they're facing. This 200 billion is like a real, not a solution to the problem, but like that we're talking about real answers at that point, right? Versus, I don't know, that we've seen a lot of kind of delaying measures and half measures and temporary things and little bits of aid here and there. It would be nice to see it's just nice to have a conversation about $200 billion versus, a couple billion. You know what I'm saying?
Last year, last winter, there was kind of a gathering of forces in Europe happening, right? And a lot of steps were made that were really important regarding the artillery munition production. And then some people, including me, deemed it a kind of a failure. But in the end, it has definitely contributed crucially to Ukraine. And I hope that, Europe and hopefully the US as well will have some sort of realization moment again that money will have to be spent in really big numbers, and there's no way getting out of it. And the later we do it, the bigger the bill is going to be.
But that's why it's so important to educate the public, because if we're going to be spending money that comes out of individual countries' coffers or the EU coffers or whatever, then you have to explain why we're spending, 20 billion or 10 billion, whatever it is, instead of investing all that money in hospitals and education and whatever. And we just haven't done that enough. Like, it goes back to what I was saying earlier on, which is we need to sit down with our nation. We need our leaders to sit down with the nation and say, this is what's at stake. We are on the cusp of or involved in a world war. This is how serious it is. And by the way, it means that next year, the UK has to spend 10 billion quid sorting out Ukraine. I'm sorry about that, guys, but do you know what? It's not our fault. It's like, if thugs came and smashed down your wall and there's no, you don't have insurance for that. And it's like, well, I've got to build the wall up and it's going to cost money and it's not my fault. It's a thug's fault. So the thugs here are Russia and it's Russia's fault. But I'm sorry, the world is not fair. You would like us to spend 10 billion quid on education, but we have to spend it on supporting Ukraine, and it's Putin's fault. You want to blame anyone, blame Putin. Anyway, that's my tuppence.
Yeah, and then like 10 years from now, that we won't have to pay 10 times as much on our military, so we can pay for the schools later. Sorry, go ahead, Alex.
Yeah.
No, that's also what we were saying at the beginning about the troll farms from Russia and the way to fight that. I mean, from our side, we should somehow educate and explain. So the issue here is not saying creating fake news, but saying things as they are and saying, okay, we have to spend those money because of Putin, because of the Russian aggression to Ukraine and to Europe.
Yeah. I don't think it goes back to my anecdote of being in a pub. I don't think people realize how serious this is. And I think that's a failure on our governments to adequately explain what they're doing and why they're doing it.
I mean, they could simply just look at how much money it's worth for Europe to have Ukraine as a trading partner and a neighbor, and then you just cut that out, and you'll probably see that that's a lot more money in trade worth than what we spent on this whole thing. And not just that, all the other implications it would cost us, like all the military and infrastructure that we will have to build the next decade if we let Russia win in Ukraine, which would have to, that number is going to be astronomical.
Millions more refugees into Europe, undoubtedly.
Yeah. So the refugee crisis we saw from Ukraine 2 years ago. Imagine if we let Ukraine actually collapse because we don't have the balls to back up Ukraine so they can defend themselves. That's going to be 10 times as high. The Ukrainians really don't want to live under Russian occupation. We know that.
Yeah, like none of us care about costs. For us, this is more of a moral issue. It's we care. We want Ukrainians to not die. But if we want to just break it down into pure costs, to me, like the logic is pretty self-evident that this is going to be cheaper now to support a democratic Ukraine that has a military just with weapons and some money versus having to deal with like a much bigger, jingoist, revisionist Russia in the future that's triumphant in Ukraine, right? I think that's just evident to anyone who's counting the beans. But I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I think we're getting towards an end of this stream, right? Jonathan needs to go. I'm sure there's another.
I've regrown my beard.
Oh, wow. I'm sure some of the people in the panel needs to go to the toilet soon as well. So. Well, it was great having you, Jonathan. This discussion was really, really interesting. I think the audience liked it too.
Thank you very much for the invite. Anytime. I really, really do appreciate it. And yeah, it's good to. I like what someone in the live chat said, which is it's like sitting in a pub and listening to the conversation on the table next door. So I think that's good enough for me.
Yeah, I mean, the whole my idea was to kind of start off serious and then get into kind of a panel discussion, which we accomplished. I'm super happy everyone in the panel was involved, and we got a couple of questions from the audience. So perfect. Joseph, do you have any closing statements?
I don't think so. Just, Colby's always a busy guy, so check out all his stuff. He had an article for The Insider, I think, this week, and he also did that interview with the CEO of Rochelle, so check that out. Daniela, I believe, recently published on our website a new update on the FPV drone stuff. Jonathan made that awesome video last week that was about who stole the artist's paintings. Oh, man, the name is on the tip of my tongue. Inji.
Quinji.
Yes, Koinji. Thank you so much, Alex. Thank God Alex is here. The Koinji paintings. That's awesome. It's a video on the channel. So yeah, check that out. And yeah, please subscribe, like the channel. Check out ATP Geopolitics. It's always great having Jonathan Pearce on. Really, really enjoy having him on. And yeah, welcome back anytime, of course. So yeah, thanks everyone for tuning in, and Slava Ukraini.
Heroim Slava.
On behalf of the brave.